Chapter 10:27. Everyone has their own secrets, and every living creature has theirs as well. It's just that you don't know if you are not one of its kind. If it doesn't tell you, you won't know either. Su Ming had his secrets, Djumo Sha had his secrets, the Abyss Dragon had his secrets, and the Bald Crane also had its secrets. At that moment, the Mountain of Stars had become one of its many secrets. When Su Ming walked down the mountain and they slowly left into the distance in the galaxy, the Bald Crane turned its head around and looked at the mountain and its summit. Its tears seeped through its heart, which was already filled with wounds, and fell on an unknown place. "Is it worth it?" the Bald Crane asked softly. This was something that rarely happened to it. It did not add any adjectives to its words, and neither did it call itself Granny Crane. It left into the distance. The Mountain of Stars left into the distance, and its memories also left into the distance. When Su Ming turned his head around, he did not see the Bald Crane's tears. Instead, he saw the seemingly heartless, comical, and greedy Bald Crane. It was just like how no one could see the tears of a fish because it was in water. No one could tell just how much of it was water and how much of it was salty tears. "Bald Crane, why do I feel like there's something wrong with you?" The big yellow dog that was the Abyss Dragon mumbled softly to the Bald Crane. "How could there be something wrong with your Grandpa Crane? I'm just wondering, do you think there's a crystal mine in that Mountain of Stars?" The Bald Crane turned its head around and cast a glance at the Mountain of Stars again. The Abyss Dragon could not see the hint of sorrow and confusion on its face when it turned its head around. Another month passed by. Su Ming walked past Luo Star Ocean and went over the Mountain of Stars. What appeared before his eyes was a boundless desert. That desert was the same as the Mountain of Stars. It floated in the galaxy, and when he looked at it, it looked like a piece of land. It was a desert formed by an endless amount of dust. Those dust were shattered stones, the shattered fragments of planets. They had been gathered together by some sort of power to form a desert whose end could not be seen. Moaning wind blew past the desert, lifting up the sand and stirring up the power of dust storms. Wherever it went, it looked as if there were countless sand dragons tumbling about and roaring, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. "Once we pass through this dust-shattered desert, we'll see my tribe. This is the most dangerous place on our journey." After the sand-shattered desert, the Sand Earthlings god swept through the periphery of Divine Essence Star Ocean with a great divine ability before he fell asleep. He gathered the dust from the shattered planets here. The shattered dust desert was a natural barrier and a place for the Sand Earth tribe to live and reproduce. That was because the Sand Earth tribe were all males. They were spirits born naturally from the sand. Most of the Sand Earthlings were short. They did not have much offensive abilities, and neither did they have any cultivation bases. They were very weak, but if a race could survive in Divine Essence Star Ocean, then if they were incredibly weak in one aspect, then there would definitely be one aspect that was incredibly strong. The Sand Earthlings could raise Sand Spirit Evil, which was a powerful, vicious beast from ancient times. Their bodies were incredibly large, and when they lay in the desert, it was hard for people to tell them apart. However, when they woke up, they would become the rulers of the desert. Sand Earthlings do not rear many of these powerful, ferocious beasts from ancient times, but each of them is incredibly strong. We'll need half a month to move through this desert. During this half a month, it'll be best if we don't disturb Sand Earthlings. Djumo Sha turned his head around and cast Su Ming a glance, then looked at the Abyss Dragon and Bald Crane before he spoke cautiously. Once Su Ming nodded to show that he understood, Djumo Sha sucked in a deep breath and stepped into the desert. With his full speed, he charged forward. Su Ming followed behind him. As he moved forward, he looked at the desert around him. It was mainly brown. There was not much yellow, and neither was there much black. That color was like blood that had dried up in the passage of time after being dyed red. A savage air traveled into Su Ming's senses. Moaning wind swept up sand and swept it into the distance, causing the area to be shrouded in obscurity. It was very easy for people to lose their sense of direction. Even divine senses were limited in this place. However, Djo Shah clearly had a way to identify the path in this place. Perhaps it was because he was worried that Su Ming would misunderstand him, or perhaps it was because his speed was not as fast as Su Ming's. But as he moved forward, he always maintained a certain distance from Su Ming. Time trickled by. When the sixth day arrived, they had already stepped into the depths of the desert. Everything around them was sand, and all they could hear was the moaning sound of wind crashing against sand. Djo Shah let out a sigh of relief, then turned his head around and whispered to Su Ming, "It's still all right. There shouldn't be any accidents on this trip. Sand Earthlings didn't stop us. In truth, as long as we don't take the initiative to provoke them and don't violate their taboos, then we won't be in any danger." Taboos. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Yes, Sand Earthlings are very unique because they don't have any females among them. All of them are spirits born from the sand, which is why they treat the sand as their race's mother. That's why they only have one taboo. They do not allow any female living beings to step into this place. They believe that this is a form of blasphemy to their race. If any female living beings step into this place, they will capture them and bury them here so that they will become part of their race's mother. But this has nothing to do with us. Djo Shah said in a relaxed manner, but when he said those words, the ground suddenly started trembling. The tremors made it seem as if there was a gigantic dragon tumbling about in the depths of the ground. There were also low growls coming from all directions with loud rumbles. At the same time, Su Ming saw with his own eyes that as the sandstorm roared behind them, the sand on the ground swelled up, and a hand that was several thousands of feet in size appeared from within the swollen sand mound. It was a hand formed by sand. Soon after, another hand appeared, and a giant that was several tens of thousands of feet tall stood up from the ground. It was a sand giant. When it stood up with its thick body, a large amount of sand fell off. The sandstorm stirred up again and surrounded the area, forming the armor and cloak on its body. There were no eyes on its head, only a gaping mouth. When it opened it, sand fell down like rain, and a loud growl reverberated in all directions. Growl! The giant threw its head back and roared. It did not even look at Su Ming and the others. It took a huge step forward and charged in the direction where they had come from. With each step it took, the ground would tremble. After a moment, Su Ming saw another giant in the distance. It crawled up from the sand on the ground, and as it roared, it let out a growl. Evil sand spirit. Djo Shah's expression changed. He instinctively took a few steps back, but when he saw the giant leaving into the distance, he relaxed. I wonder who provoked the Sand Earthlings in this desert. He shook his head. When he looked toward Su Ming, he noticed that he was frowning. At that moment, a sound that sounded like a whistle came from the ground. It rose and fell, and there were also piercing screeches echoing in the air. Fortunately, even though the sound came from underground, it could be clearly heard, and it was swiftly leaving into the distance. A female living creature has stepped into this desert. Djo Shah's eyes swiftly focused. That must be it, or else it would be impossible for the Sand Earthlings to make that whistle and head over. If it was just a normal provocation, they wouldn't have appeared. Su Ming sighed and rubbed the center of his brows. Where is your tribe? Su Ming looked towards Djo Shah. If you travel straight for about 10 days, you'll be able to leave this desert. Over there, you'll see a broken planet. That planet is where my tribe is, Djo Shah said in detail. When Su Ming heard this, he lifted his right hand and pushed down at the ground beneath him through the air. Immediately, the sand on the ground sank down. There were faint signs of it being burned and melted, and it formed the outline of a runic symbol. Then, when Su Ming swung his arm, the sand around him swam over and covered the runic symbol. This is... Djo Shah was momentarily stunned. I'll be leaving for a while. Wait for me and your tribe. I'll rush over in at most a month, Su Ming said flatly. He turned his head around to look at the bald crane and the abyss dragon. The bald crane was connected to Su Ming's mind, so it naturally understood what he meant. It charged towards Su Ming and was put away into his storage bag. As for the abyss dragon, While it was unwilling, it did not reject Su Ming. Once it was put away into his storage bag, a stern look appeared on Su Ming's face, and a freezing glare shone in his eyes. Before that glare disappeared, Su Ming had already taken a step in the direction they had come from. He was so fast that he was like a bolt of lightning. The sand he stirred up and the sound of air being sliced apart let out a piercing, sharp sound, as if the illusion and reality had crashed into each other. Before Djo Mo Sha could finish speaking, Su Ming had already left into the distance. A focused glint appeared in his eyes, and a pensive look appeared on his face. After a long while, after a moment of hesitation, he turned around and swiftly left in the direction he had set. He might not be able to guess what Su Ming wanted to do, but all of this was definitely related to the abnormal actions of the Sand Earthlings. With his level of cultivation, it would be difficult for him to participate in this, and there was no need for him to follow him. He would bring Su Ming back to his tribe, and this would be considered as him repaying him for saving his life. After that, they would no longer have any contact with each other. In a spot far away from Su Ming was the edge of the desert. At that moment, sand tumbled about. Rumbling sounds echoed in the air, as if the ground had turned into an ocean. There were also piercing whistles echoing in the air. Su Hui's expression was firm, and there was a murderous look in her phoenix-like eyes. She was smiling coldly as she stared at her surroundings. Dressed in red, she was incredibly eye-catching in the desert like a rose in full bloom, and she exuded an enchanting beauty. She did not retreat. Instead, she charged into the depths of the desert. The rumbling sounds around her became even stronger, and after a moment, the ground trembled violently. She saw a giant that was tens of thousands of feet tall in the distance, and it was charging towards her with a roar. Before the giant closed in, he had already lifted his right hand and flung it upwards. Immediately, the sand in front of him tumbled about with a loud bang, stirring up a sandstorm that looked as if it was sweeping up the sky. In the span of a breath, it closed in on Su Hui. I'm begging for recommendation votes. I'm begging for monthly votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1028. Su Hui let out a cold harumph. At the instant the whirlwind closed in on her, she did not stop moving. She quickly formed a seal with her hands, and almost at the instant the whirlwind touched her body, she swung her arms outwards. Scatter! Her hair danced in the wind, but the whirlwind seemed to have frozen in front of her the moment she spoke. It came to an abrupt stop, and a roar that sounded like it came from ancient times came from within the whirlwind. That roar contained a will that could destroy the world and the universe. It turned into flames in the depths of the whirlwind and spread outwards. Immediately, the whirlwind in front of Su Hui started burning and turned into a whirlwind of fire. That roar became even more piercing. In the end, it turned into a cry. As that cry rang out, a fire phoenix charged out from within the flaming tornado. That fire phoenix was several thousand feet long, and it looked extremely majestic. It circled the sky, and its cry seemed to burn everything in its path. Phoenix fire descend. Murderous intent shone in Su Hui's eyes. She lifted her right hand and pointed at the sand giant in the distance. The fire phoenix instantly charged towards the giant. As the giant roared, both sides crashed into each other. A loud bang that shook the ground spread out violently in the desert. The powerful divine ability belonging to those in Lunar Culpa realm was brought out without holding anything back at that moment. Su Hui's speed did not change. In an instant, she arrived beside the giant that had let out the bang. The giant's entire body was burning in a sea of fire. Its knees bent, and it knelt on the ground with a thump. Pain appeared on its face, and its body started burning rapidly. However, Su Hui's expression did not relax because of this. Instead, a solemn expression appeared on her face. She stopped moving and looked around her. As the giant burned, the ground trembled, and around a dozen sand giants appeared around her. These sand fiends took huge strides forward and every single time their footsteps landed, the ground would tremble. They were swiftly closing in on her. If it were just these giants, it would not have been enough to make Su Hui react this way. What truly made her pupils shrink was a sand giant that was only thousands of feet tall in the distance. The sand under his feet seemed to have gained sentience and was gathering together to form a small hill. He stood on the hill with a cold look in his eyes as he stared at Su Hui from afar. In his left hand was a dirt-yellow bough. The bough was hundreds of feet long, and it was the same height as his body. In fact, the sand in the area around Su Hui tumbled and pushed against each other to form a circular barrier. Whistles echoed on the barrier, and dwarves that were only half the size of a human swarmed out. They were dressed in simple clothes and were very dirty, as if they had never been cleaned since they were born. There were tens of thousands of these half-humans, and they surrounded the area. The whistles came from their mouths, and the sharp whistles set off the scene around Su Hui, creating a strange atmosphere. Su Hui's expression was dark, but before she could do anything, the dozen or so sand giants had already closed in on her. As they roared, the sand on the ground flew up, and a dozen or so whirlwinds manifested and charged toward Su Hui. The whirlwinds were too fast. In the blink of an eye, they submerged Su Hui. At that moment, the sand giant that was thousands of feet tall on the hill in the distance lifted the bough in his left hand and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. With a hum, the bough was fully drawn. The sand around him gathered together at that instant, and in the span of a few breaths, it gathered into a sand arrow on his bow. Buzz! A sound echoed in the world. The sand giant that was thousands of feet tall released his right hand, and immediately the sand arrow let out a piercing whistle that shook the sky and earth as it tore through the air. It turned into a shooting star that charged toward Su Hui. In midair, it sliced through the air, and at its tip, it burned space to form a deity statue. The deity statue was a man in armor with his arms crossed over his chest and his eyes closed. In an instant, he closed in on Su Hui, who was being attacked by the dozen or so whirlwinds. Boom! 8 of the dozen or so whirlwinds turned into flames, but at the instant the arrow charged in, they turned into loud bangs that surged into the sky. In the midst of those bangs, Su Hui swiftly retreated until she was thousands of feet away. Blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth, and with a pale face, she glared at the giant that held the bough in the distance. Excited voices came from the sand earthlings in the area. All of them were men, and in their excitement, they lifted their heads and howled as if they were in heat. The killing intent in Su Hui's eyes became even stronger. When she saw that the dozen or so giants were closing in on her, she moved swiftly and disappeared without a trace. However, at the instant she disappeared, there was a gigantic deity statue in a place that was also very far away in the desert. That deity statue was 100,000 feet tall, and it looked exactly the same as the statue formed by the arrow shot by the person with the bow. However, it was even more awe-inspiring and real. Standing on the head of the deity statue that was 100,000 feet tall was an old man. That old man was dressed in bee skin, and his body was very dirty, but there was a flash of wisdom in his eyes. He held a black skull in his hand, and once he lifted it up, he let out a loud roar. His roar contained the language of his people, but it was complicated, awkward, and difficult to understand. However, as he roared, moaning sounds came from the entire desert, as if they were talking to him. At that moment, a chilling glare appeared in the old man's eyes. He lifted his right hand and pointed in the direction where Su Hui was. The moment he pointed, Su Hui's body fused into space. Ripples instantly spread out from the spot where she had disappeared, and her body was forced out of space. Su Hui's expression changed. She gritted her teeth and moved again, but this time she did not fuse into space. Instead, she shifted, but at the instant she disappeared, the sound of something crashing came from the wall to the right that surrounded the desert. The hundreds of sand earthlings on the wall looked as calm as ever. They were still excited and agitated, and there was a lewd look on their faces. Su Hui's body was forced out of the space in front of them again. In fact, this time, more blood trickled out of the corners of her mouth. Su Hui's face was pale. She had tried to fuse into space, but she had failed. Her attempt to leave the place had also failed. A powerful seal had been set up in the area by a power that surpassed her level of cultivation. She could not break through it. She could ignore the dozen-something sand giants around her, but the power of the bow user could injure her with just one arrow. To Su Hui, this person was a powerful warrior in Lunar Culpa realm, just like her. She could still somewhat handle this sort of encirclement, but if any other changes occurred, it would be very difficult for her to escape from this place. Almost at the instant she was forced out, a piercing, buzzing sound traveled into her ears. The second arrow from the person with the bow shot through the air and instantly appeared in front of Su Hui. Su Hui gritted her teeth and turned around swiftly. As her hair fluttered, she quickly formed a seal with her hands and pointed at the incoming arrow. With a bang, the arrow crumbled, but Su Hui also coughed up blood. She staggered a few steps back, but she did not show weakness. Instead, she moved and disappeared again. When she reappeared, she was already beside the person with the bow in the distance. He lifted his right hand and pushed forward. When he unfurled his fingers, 3 crimson rings flew out from between his fingers. Once the 3 rings appeared, they connected with each other and charged towards the person with the bow. A glint appeared in the eyes of the person with the bow, but he did not dodge. He bent his body and pushed his left hand against the ground. With it, booming sounds reverberated in the air. An endless amount of sand swiftly gathered around him to form a protective barrier. Once it crashed into the 3 rings, the sand barrier crumbled, but the third arrow from the person with the bow shot out at the instant the barrier crumbled and charged towards Su Hui's face with a howl. Su Hui was about to dodge, but suddenly, a cold harumph mixed with a complicated and difficult-to-understand voice echoed in the sky. It came from a place far away from where she was. It was the voice of the old man on the 100,000 feet tall statue, which could not be seen from where she was. He lifted his left hand and seized the air as if he had caught something. A ferocious smile appeared on his lips. Su Hui could not dodge at all while she was in midair, because she could clearly sense that her body had been seized by an invisible hand. The power coming from that hand belonged to those in Solar Culpa realm, and it looked as if it wanted to crush her in one go. She could not dodge. The arrow came charging at her with a bang, and when a loud bang shook the area, Su Hui coughed up blood. She regained her mobility, but as she continued retreating, her robes were torn, and her right shoulder was a bloody mess. But she did not choose to give up. As she retreated, she lifted her left hand and struck her body a few times. Immediately, 17 figures appeared around her. Like Phoenix, 18 slaps. Su Hui let out a low shout, and all the figures around her immediately gathered together in midair with her as the center to form the shape of a crescent moon. The power of Lunar Culpa realm erupted from her body, causing a sea of fire to erupt from the formed moon. As if it had turned into a fire phoenix, it charged towards the person with the bow. It was so fast that it closed in on him in an instant. The person with the bow's expression changed, and he immediately retreated. He drew his bow with both hands, and 3 arrows gathered together before he shot them out with a bang. All of this happened too quickly. In an instant, both sides crashed into each other. With a loud bang, a powerful and piercing light erupted, causing the people in the area to be unable to see what was going on inside. At that moment, Su Ming was moving forward swiftly in a desert that was still a distance away from where he was. He had even shifted, and when he occasionally disappeared, he would reappear in the distance that no one could see. His expression was dark as he charged forward. If the person who was trapped was not the person he guessed, Su Ming would ignore it. But if it was truly as he guessed, and Su Hui followed him in secret, then Su Ming had to save her. After all, Su Hui had come to protect him. He might not be Dao Kong, but his personality was not Dao Kong's either. That was why he would save her. He was so fast that he stirred up wind and sand. Booming sounds echoed in the air as he drew closer to the place where Su Hui was trapped. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 10:29. Pain. That was what Su Hui felt the most at that moment. Her body was flung away, and when she landed on the sand, she managed to regain her footing with great difficulty. Her face was pale, and she coughed up a large mouthful of blood. Her body was already covered in wounds, and her flesh was a bloody mess. She looked as if she could no longer stand stably. She had already done her best. The person with the bow was about the same level of cultivation as her, and he had forced her to activate the Lake Phoenix art. She had yet to master this art to its peak, and every single time she used it, she would have to bear the burden. However, its power was definitely not to be underestimated. The bow in the person's hand had already fallen into the distance. His entire right arm had disappeared, and 17 wounds that pierced through his body could be seen on his chest. His face was pale, and he coughed up blood as well. His body that was thousands of feet tall shrank at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. When he was only 100 feet tall, he managed to stabilize his injuries. He glared at Su Hui and let out a low growl. As he roared, the sand around him immediately gathered and blocked up his wound. It also gathered on his right arm and turned into a new arm. He seized the bow in the air, and it swiftly flew towards him. Once he caught it, his body grew to thousands of feet tall once more as the sand continued gathering on him. He stood there, as if he had never been injured in the first place. Above his head, the sand gathered together to form a moon. It was the moon of sand. For the first time, despair appeared in Su Hui's eyes. She staggered and was about to retreat when she suddenly bent her back. Her body flew out of the air and landed on the ground with a bang. A short, semi-transparent figure appeared at the spot where Su Hui had been and pulled back his fist. The short figure might be indistinct, but it could be vaguely seen that it was an old man. That person was the old man whose physical body was on the 100,000 feet tall statue in the distant desert. His current existence was an illusory body formed by his divine ability. He might be short, but at the moment he appeared, the person with the bow who was thousands of feet tall behind him immediately knelt down on the ground. The sand giants that were tens of thousands of feet tall in the area also knelt down. There were also the tens of thousands of sand earthlings on the circular barrier. All of them worshipped in excitement and fervor. Su Hui struggled to get up from the ground, but before she could do anything, the sand around her instantly gathered and turned into 4 chains of sand, directly binding her 4 limbs. Her entire body was lifted up and suspended in midair. The illusory old man lifted his right hand, and a sand blade appeared in his hand. With that blade in hand, he slowly walked towards Su Hui. The buzzing and cheers from the sand earthlings around them grew louder. The waves of sound rose and fell, as if they were chanting some sort of ritual. Su Hui bit her lower lip. Her cultivation had completely dissipated when the old man punched her. There was also a restriction preventing her from self-destructing. She silently looked at the sky as scenes flashed before her eyes. She, who was born in a mortal family, was taken away by the Phoenix sect when she was young. In fact, in her memory, the appearance of her parents was already blurry, and she couldn't remember them clearly. She had also returned to her hometown before, but it had already turned into dust in the passage of time. Her family had long since grown old and disappeared without a trace. But now, the scene in front of her suddenly became much clearer. She saw her father, her mother, her family. The scenes continued appearing in her mind, and a warm smile bloomed on Su Hui's lips. She slowly closed her eyes. This is my life. From the day I became a disciple of Phoenix sect, my fate was decided. For the rest of my life, I must serve one of the direct descendants of Morning Dao sect. This is my life. Now I can be considered to be free. Su Hui sighed softly in her heart. When Su Hui closed her eyes and waited for death to arrive, a loud bang came from the barrier by her side. Along with it were the panicked cries of the tens of thousands of sand earthlings. There were also the enraged roars of the dozen-something sand giants and a cold harumph from the illusory old man. All of this caused Su Hui who had already given up hope. As her eyelashes fluttered, she tried to open her eyes, but her body was gradually losing all its strength. Even the act of opening her eyes was a little difficult for her. She could only open the slits in her eyes. Through her eyelashes, through the haze, she could see a familiar figure outside the barrier in the distance. He was currently punching the barrier. "It's him," Suhui mumbled in her heart. "He shouldn't have come. With his personality, everything he does is for his own benefit. But why is he here? He came back when we were fighting against the waves of tears. Right now, he's here, and he's back again. Is he still Dao Kong? Will a person change so quickly? But no matter what, it doesn't matter whether it's Dao Kong or the others. Thank you." Su Hui's heart was calm. She mumbled in her heart, speaking in a soft voice that only her soul could hear. Su Ming rammed his fist against the barrier, and a loud bang spread in all directions. A strong rebound also came from within the barrier, causing Su Ming to stagger a few steps backwards. When he lifted his head, he saw Su Hui in the barrier. He saw her limbs bound by sand chains, her eyes closed, and her presence as faint as gossamer threads. At the same time, he saw the sand earthlings and the dozen-something gigantic evil sand earthlings, as well as the person with the bow and the illusory old man who was thousands of feet tall in the barrier. The mighty pressure from lunar Culpa realm from the person with the bow, the power of solar Culpa realm from the illusory old man, and the dozen-something sand giants who were in the later stage of World Plane realm caused Su Ming's pupils to shrink. This was not a power he could fight against with his current level of cultivation. The dozen-something sand giants were still manageable, but the existence of the person with the bow alone was a great threat to Su Ming, and it was even more so for the illusory old man. Su Ming fell silent. As he retreated, the dozen-something sand giants in the barrier roared and took huge strides forward. Their bodies could pierce through the barrier, and they charged towards Su Ming. As for the person with the bow, scorn appeared on his face. In his eyes, Su Ming, who was only in World Plane realm, was not worthy of him attacking. In fact, he only needed one bow, and he was confident that he could reduce this person to ashes. Su Ming sighed in his heart. Su Hui's life was hanging by a thread, and the more time passed, the more danger she would be in. Su Ming did not have much time to think about it, unless he did not want to save her. Since he had already decided to save this woman who seemed a little silly to him, then the exposure of his power was no longer within his considerations. Forget it. Su Ming shook his head and took his first step forward. At the instant his foot landed, the power of divine essence rose from his body. Countless bumps immediately appeared on his sacred constellation robe, which had turned into a sackcloth. His level of cultivation also rose at that instant. He was so quick that in the blink of an eye, he crashed into a sand giant. That sand giant laughed ferociously and threw a punch at him. Su Ming did not even spare a glance. In fact, he did not even bother dodging. Instead, he rushed forward. With a bang, Su Ming crashed into the sand giant. At the instant they did so, the sand giant's ferocious laughter turned into disbelief. Its right arm crumbled with a bang, and Su Ming shot through the giant's body. He was completely unharmed, and, at the same time, he lifted his right hand and threw a punch behind him. With it, the sand giant's body shuddered and crumbled. Very weak, Su Ming lifted his foot and took his second step forward. His level of cultivation had already reached the later stage of World Plane realm. This was the fusion of his physical power and his cultivation base, and a comprehensive power erupted from his body. The two sand giants in front of him stirred up a whirlwind as they roared. They swept up their bodies and closed in on the incoming Su Ming in an instant. Their bodies crashed into each other. Boom! Boom! Two loud bangs reverberated in the world at that moment, causing all the sand earthlings to be shocked when they looked over. The two sand giants shuddered and crumbled at the same time, as if there was a power they could not withstand crushing everything about them. Su Ming did not stop. He took his third step forward. At that moment, his level of cultivation had risen, and he had fused with divine essence. He had reached great completion in the later stage of World Plane realm, and with just one more step, he would be able to step in a lunar Culpa realm. This was Su Ming's current limit. It was the strongest power he could bring forth, but the prerequisite was that he did not use his Akang clone. However, in the next breath, when Su Ming took his fourth step and the four sand giants appeared in front of him, two words that only he could hear tumbled out of his mouth when his foot landed. Akang. At the instant those two words were spoken, in a galaxy that was incredibly far away from Divine Essence Star Ocean, in Western Ring Nebula, which was part of the territory of the four great true worlds and was separated by Black Ink Planet, Su Ming's Akang clone swiftly opened his eyes in the purple galaxy. Purple light shone in his eyes, and a supreme, mighty pressure erupted from his body with a bang. At the same time, Su Ming's level of cultivation rose once again at the instant he crashed into the four sand giants. In an instant, he reached lunar Culpa realm. This was not a true lunar Culpa realm, because there was no moon on Su Ming's body. However, the presence spreading out from his body at that moment gave others the feeling that he was in lunar Culpa realm. Boom, boom, boom. 4 consecutive bangs shot into the air, and the four sand giants before Su Ming crumbled. He took his 5th step forward and rammed his fist against the barrier. With just one punch, the barrier instantly shuddered. Cracks spread out, and with a bang, it shattered into pieces. That punch was already infinitesimally close to Solar Culpa realm, and it also contained divine essence. Even if Su Hui could not break it, Su Ming could. The expression of the person with the bow changed drastically, and disbelief appeared on his face. He had personally seen Su Ming continuously becoming stronger. In the beginning, he had looked down on his cultivation base in World Plane Realm, but with just 5 steps, he had already reached Lunar Culpa Realm. The final punch exuded a combat power that was infinitesimally close to Solar Culpa Realm, and it caused his heart to tremble. The illusory old man by his side also had a grave expression that had never appeared on his face before. "Sir, who are you?" The illusory old man instantly asked in a shrill voice. "You can call me Dao Kong. I am the man of the woman beside you in name. Looking for recommendations, to be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 10:30. My man in name. Those words seemed to have been dragged out for 1,000 years as they echoed in Su Hui's ears. They were spoken slowly, and gradually, as if they were separated by a different dimension. His words stirred a ripple in Su Hui's heart as it gradually became deathly still. The ripple was like a blooming flower, and it continued to spread and reverberate in her heart, until it turned into a force that allowed her to open her eyes. At that moment, her eyes opened a slit. Inside the crack, her eyes were dim, lifeless and lifeless. However, in the world she saw through the crack, the figure of the man who was supposed to be her stood outside the crumbling barrier. The fragments of the barrier seemed to serve as a foil to his figure, making him the center of attention in that world. Su Ming's voice echoed in the universe, causing the illusory old man's heart to sink. At the same time, the bow-wielding giant by his side, the thousands of feet tall giant, lifted the bow with his left hand without any hesitation. He swiftly drew the bowstring with his right hand, and with it, a buzzing sound spread out swiftly, instantly turning into a piercing sound that sliced through the air. It was the sound of the bow-wielding giant letting go of the bowstring. The arrow shot through the air, and a sharp arrow formed by sand charged towards Su Ming at lightning speed. In an instant, it appeared right in front of him, who was moving towards the shattered barrier. The arrow's speed was indescribable. It was as if it was still in the distance when Su Ming blinked, but in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived at the center of his brows. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at it coldly. At that moment, his level of cultivation was infinitesimally close to Solar Culpa Realm. This was due to the power from his Akang clone, but this was not even his strongest state without his Akang clone personally coming over. He could still become stronger. Almost at the instant he lifted his head, Su Ming lifted his right hand. Not only did he not move back, he instead took another step forward. Before his foot even landed, he seized the air in front of him with his right hand, and a huge force swiftly surged forth from his hand. That force felt as if an entire mountain range had crashed into him, causing Su Ming's arms to go numb. However, as his body shared the burden and spread the force, he forcefully dissolved the force in his body. At the same time, he took his sixth step and landed on the ground. Boom! The ground trembled because of Su Ming's footsteps. The sand trembled because of his footsteps. Wind stirred and clouds surged in the entire sky at that instant. As they howled, there was no end to them. They lifted Su Ming's long hair, causing his expression to look ghastly and aloof, along with a heinous, malicious air. What his right hand was grabbing was the sand arrow shot by the archer. The arrow buzzed in his hand, but could not break free from his grip. Su Ming lowered his head and cast a glance at the arrow in his hand. A hint of surprise slowly appeared in his eyes. That strange light turned into the sun, moon, and stars that tumbled backwards in Su Ming's eyes, as if time was flowing backwards in his eyes. When the person with the bow and the illusory old man saw the surprise in his eyes, their expressions changed, especially the illusory old man. He subconsciously took a few steps back and cried out in a shrill voice, "Do you want to kill me? The power of time. You're the apostle of the spirit of time. It's this bow, this arrow." Su Ming did not seem to have heard the illusory old man's piercing voice. He looked at the arrow in his hand, and pictures flashed in his eyes. In those pictures, he saw Su Hui's heroic stance just now, as well as her counterattack onto the arrow. When Su Ming saw the 18 strikes of Lake of Phoenix, saw the 3 arrows shot out by the archer, and the powerful, piercing light, it was like the final fireworks that burned Su Ming's eyes, causing the pictures to disappear in the flames, and his eyes to return to normal at that moment. "I'm the one who injured her." Su Ming lifted his head. With a squeeze of his right hand, the sand arrow swiftly disintegrated and turned into fine sand that fell through the gaps between his fingers. Wind blew past and lifted the sand, turning it into a veil that danced in front of Su Ming. "Kill him." The illusory old man retreated swiftly. His piercing voice reverberated in the air. The remaining sand giants in the area roared in anger and rushed towards Su Ming. The person with the bow had an incredibly solemn expression on his face. As he rushed forward, he drew his bow again. This time, there were 3 arrows on his bow. When the illusory old man retreated, the sand blade in his hand disappeared, and a black, illusory skull appeared in his hand. As he stroked it continuously, complicated and difficult to understand chants tumbled out of his mouth. As he did so, muffled booms came from the sky. It was as if the sky had turned into a barrier, and there was someone behind it who wanted to break through it. A cold sneer appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. He swiftly moved forward and instantly appeared in front of a sand giant. He lifted his right hand and pushed at the center of the sand giant's brows. Even though his body was as insignificant as an ant compared to the giants, the sand giant started trembling violently. Despair appeared on its face, and cracks appeared at the center of its brows. In an instant, they spread through its entire body. Su Ming's palm contained his offensive power that was infinitesimally close to Solar Culpa realm. It was definitely not something that the evil sand spirit, whose level of cultivation was equivalent to those in the later stage of World Plane realm, could fight against. Boom! The sand giant's entire body crumbled and disintegrated layer by layer. When Su Ming left, it turned into a small hill of sand. It lost its spirit and its life force. At the same time, another sand giant swung its gigantic fist, and like a sandstorm, it swept up Su Ming's robes. At the instant it closed in on Su Ming with an enraged roar, he turned his head around. He did not attack, neither did he dodge. However, the shadows of the sun and moon appeared in his eyes. It was the illusion of stars, sun, and moon. It was a power that existed when one believed in it. It was a strange power Su Ming had mastered in Black Ink Planet. That power fused into Su Ming's illusion of stars, sun, and moon. At that moment, it erupted, and the incoming sand giant immediately jolted. Its fist came to an abrupt halt in front of Su Ming. Confusion appeared in its eyes, along with struggle. Su Ming no longer bothered himself with the sand giant. With a leap, he stepped on the sand giant and leaped into midair. His long hair danced in the air, and his robes fluttered. His gaze was piercingly cold, and it landed on the person with the bow. It was also at that moment that buzzing sounds reverberated in the air. As the 8 sand giants closed in on him, the 3 arrows from the people with the bows sliced through the air with a whistle and charged towards Su Ming, who was in midair. Before they even closed in, the person with the bow let out a low roar. Explode! While his voice was still echoing in the air, loud booming sounds came from the 3 arrows. They crumbled and exploded in midair, but they were not meant to injure anyone. Instead, they were meant to use the impact of their self-destruction to shock the enemy in midair. This was the thoughts of the person with the bow. As the booming sounds echoed in the air, the person with the bow froze on the ground and stabbed the bow in his hand into the sand. His body trembled, and as he tightened his grip on the longbow, he let out a low roar that shook the sky. 100 arrow murder. As he roared, the sand around him immediately floated up and turned into 100 sharp arrows. At the instant he drew the bow and released the bowstring, the whistling sounds from the 100 sharp arrows shook the sky and earth. They shot out together and charged towards Su Ming in midair. Long-distance attacks are indeed effective. Are you trying to bully me because I don't have this art? As Su Ming spoke flatly, he patted his storage bag with his right hand, and a gourd immediately appeared in his hand. He swiped his left hand across the gourd and released it before he bent his back and bowed towards the gourd. "Treasured gourd, please kill me." Once he said these words, a powerful light instantly erupted from the gourd in midair. That light had 6 colors, and as it changed back and forth, an eye immediately appeared around the gourd. Once that eye locked onto the person with the bow, a small person flew out from a gourd. That small person held a sharp blade in its hand. It did not have eyes, but it instantly charged towards the person with the bow. It flew out and shot through the 100 sharp arrows. This scene was incredibly clear. The 100 arrows went towards Su Ming, and the treasured gourd went towards the person with the bow. 1,000 arrow murder. The expression of the person with the bow on the ground changed, and his pupils shrank swiftly. At the instant Su Ming's gourd appeared, a sense of danger rose in him, and it was especially so when the eye on the gourd locked onto him. That sense of danger swiftly grew stronger, and in the memories he inherited, there seemed to be a treasure that made him tremble that was incredibly similar to this gourd. Under that sense of danger, he executed his strongest divine ability without any hesitation. Once he said these words, a gigantic vortex appeared on the ground with him as its center. Some of the sand earthlings who did not manage to escape in time let out shrill screams of pain, and their bodies were reduced to flesh and blood in the vortex. At that moment, the person with the bow could no longer care about the sand earthlings in the face of danger. Protecting his own life was his main priority. Arrows instantly shot out from the gigantic vortex. A total of 1,000 arrows stirred up a shocking sound as they sliced through the air. They shot out together, and if this scene could form a picture, it would definitely be passed down through the ages. When he saw the arrows closing in on Su Ming at an incredible speed, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lowered his head in midair and did not look at the arrows. Instead, he looked at his right palm. He stared at his palm and the palm lines on it. At the instant the arrows closed in on him, Su Ming pushed his right hand forward through the air. "God of Berserkers! Palm!" Su Ming said flatly. Immediately, an illusion that was tens of thousands of feet big appeared around him. With Su Ming as the center, it continued spreading out until it turned into a gigantic palm. The palm lines were the same as Su Ming's right palm, and the shadows of the sun and moon shone rapidly in Su Ming's eyes. The palm stood erect and appeared in the world. When Su Ming pushed his right hand forward, booming sounds surged into the sky. The palm shot through Su Ming's body and charged forward with loud booming sounds. Cracks appeared in the air, and cracks tore through the sky. The booming sounds from the palm were deafening, and like a wall, it crashed into the 1,000 arrows. This was the god of berserkers art Su Ming executed when his level of cultivation was infinitesimally close to solar Kulpa realm. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1031. This was not a simple god of berserkers art. It was created by fusing Su Ming's illusion of stars, sun, and moon together with a strange power that would exist as long as he believed in it. It could be said that this was a divine ability that only Su Ming could execute in the world. This art might have evolved from the second god of berserkers' palm, but even the second god of berserkers would definitely not be able to execute a divine ability of this level. This was Su Ming's palm. He believed that his palm could blast open the void. He believed that his palm could shatter the thousands of sharp arrows. He also believed that his palm was an indestructible barrier in this battlefield. The palm grew larger, and with a loud bang, it crashed into the 1,000 arrows. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth. The small human from the gourd closed in on the person with the bow on the ground in the form of a long arc, and the person with the bow retreated swiftly with a change in expression. He also saw the scene in the sky, and once he saw it, his heart trembled, and he could not help but say one word: turn. Once he said it, the 1,000 arrows immediately started spinning, and an even sharper penetrating force erupted from them. As they rotated, they gathered together, and the 1,100 arrows turned into one arrow. Its power erupted once again, and it was several times stronger than before, but Su Ming smiled at that moment. The power that would exist as long as he believed in it was Su Ming's palm divine ability. Its form had evolved into the god of berserkers' palm, and its spirit was manifested in the illusion of stars, sun, and moon. Its power was the art that would exist as long as he believed in it. However, Su Ming had only completed half of this art when he believed in it. The other half would only be complete once someone believed in it. Only then would it truly become a unique divine ability that belonged solely to Su Ming. Yet now, as the person with the bow spoke, he clearly believed in it. Because of that, Su Ming's gigantic illusory palm was no longer an illusion. It swiftly gained corporeal form, and with a bang, it crashed into the 1,000 arrows. Booming sounds surged into the sky and shook the entire area. A wave of impact that looked like a windstorm tumbled through the area and tumbled backwards. The one arrow formed by the 1,000 arrows disintegrated in the sky. Once it turned back into 1,000 arrows, they instantly exploded, unable to stop Su Ming's palm in the slightest. At the same time, the person with the bow on the ground no longer had time to think about this. He retreated swiftly, but no matter how he retreated, he could not avoid the small human from the gourd slash that went around his neck. The treasured gourd killed. The treasured gourd that killed. Blood gushed out of the person's neck. He staggered and staggered, then lifted his hands to press down on the wound on his neck, but he could not do so, because his head flew into the air under the gourd slash. Sand rushed in from all directions, as if trying to catch his head and reconnect it to his body. Even with such an injury, the bow wielder had not been completely destroyed in body and spirit. Sand rapidly gathered around his empty neck, as if he was about to recover. His body shrank even more rapidly, as if he was using the shrinking of his body to heal his injuries. I am an evil sand earthling. I am the spirit of the sand earthlings. I am the spirit of the sand earthlings for 3,691 generations. I will not die here. The head that flew into the air let out a shocking roar. However, that roar was suppressed by Su Ming's gigantic palm in the sky. His palm had already grown from tens of thousands of feet to 100,000 feet, and it came crashing down on the ground, the roaring head and the headless person with the bow. Besides the person with the bow, There were nearly 10,000 sand earthlings in that area of 100,000 feet. Their frail bodies were trembling at that moment, and they fled in all directions in fear. They were afraid. They believed that the palm that seemed to be able to replace the sky would crush their bodies. As they believed in it, the palm became more corporeal and stronger. Don't run. This is fake. Don't run. The more you believe in it, the stronger it will become. The head of the person with the bow fell to the ground, and he started roaring. If he still could not understand Su Ming's art, then he did not deserve to have the power of Lunar Culpa Realm. The illusory old man in the distance had reached a critical moment in his art. He wanted to warn his people, but he knew that with how frail and terrified his people were, his warning would be useless in this life and death crisis. A cold glare appeared in his eyes, and the low cries of his incantations became even stronger. He lifted his arms and called out to the sky. The muffled booms in the sky became clearer. The color of the sand has become slightly fainter, Su Ming said softly in midair. Boom! A loud bang reverberated in the air, and the ground trembled. Once Su Ming's palm disappeared, a gigantic palm print appeared on the ground. The sand chains around Su Hui's body had disappeared, and she was lying there quietly. She was not injured in the slightest, but around her, the near 10,000 sand earthlings were a bloody mess. Their bones had all been crushed, and a bloody stench spread out from them. Their blood dyed the sand, causing the color of the sand to become much brighter. The body of the person with the bow had completely shattered at the center. His head was the same, and his body and soul had been destroyed. Only the gigantic bow by his side was buried in the sand. Only its tip was revealed, and, as it trembled, it let out wails. Su Ming looked at his right index finger. There was a faint fragrance of God Ascension nectar spreading out from it. This was the result of him suppressing and sealing it once he brought out his power. Fortunately, the fragrance only filled the area around him and had not spread out yet. Su Ming moved and walked to the ground. He walked past the bloody mess and arrived at the place where the bow was buried. He stomped on the ground with his right foot, and the bow immediately bounced up from the ground. Su Ming grabbed it. At the instant he grabbed it, it shrank rapidly until it was a size Su Ming could use. The whales on it trembled, and a submissive look appeared on its face. Once he put away the bow, Su Ming walked towards Su Hui and gently picked her up from the ground. He wrapped an arm around her waist and placed her head against his chest. The faint fragrance from Su Hui's body wafted into Su Ming's nose, and he sent his life force in her body to speed up the healing of her injuries. Doubt Kong. Su Hui struggled to open her eyes and looked at Su Ming. Her voice was incredibly weak. Rest well, I'm here, Su Ming said softly. He lifted his head and looked towards the tens of thousands of sand earthlings who had spread out in the distance. He saw the illusory old man who had his arms spread out in the air, as if he was calling out to the sky. The old man's hair danced in the air. His body flickered, and he let out a loud roar towards the sky. As the roar reverberated in the air, another roar came from the sky. This roar spread through the entire desert, and in that instant, every single grain of sand in this seemingly boundless desert began to tremble in that instant. Djo Shah was charging forward at a spot near the end of the desert. He could already see the end of the desert and the quiet galaxy beyond it, but at that moment, his expression changed swiftly. He lowered his head to look at the sand, and a solemn expression appeared on his face. Once he turned his head around to look into the distance, he gritted his teeth and increased his speed. He could sense a wave of madness and murderous intent coming from the sand. In fact, when he moved forward, the sand under his feet started flowing backwards like flowing water. He was so fast that he even bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood. Then, he turned his body into a blood shadow that instantly left into the distance. He could sense that the sand in that area was not the only thing that moved. All the sand in the entire desert had started moving at that moment. As it tumbled about, a large windstorm was stirred up. Booming sounds mixed with moans echoed in the desert. After a moment, When he finally rushed out of the desert and stepped into the quiet galaxy beyond it, he turned his head around and looked towards the desert. He saw a scene that caused him to be unable to calm down. It was a scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. He saw a gigantic face in the sky above the desert. That face looked as if it was lying upside down in the sky. At that moment, its body sank down, and not only did it reveal its face, it also revealed its body. That body was the size of the entire desert. The 100,000 feet tall statue in the desert also started trembling. Signs that it was about to wake up spread out from its body. The old man on its head was meditating at that moment and did not move. However, the black skull in his bosom was shining with a black light that could intimidate people's souls. Who is summoning me? A voice that could reverberate through the entire desert came swiftly from the sky. Su Ming lifted his head swiftly, and his pupils shrank. He saw the gigantic body in the sky and the endless face. That face belonged to a man. His eyes were closed, and a long scar stretched from the center of his brows to his neck. There were wounds on that scar, and it was ghastly white. A mighty pressure that Su Ming had never sensed before descended from that body at that moment. To Su Ming, that mighty pressure had even surpassed that of a master of fate, lives, and death. It might not be able to compare to a king when it was at the peak of its power, but it was already close. That mighty pressure was only slightly weaker than Sui Chenzi's, but it gave Su Ming a feeling that this should be a powerful warrior who was in the same realm as Sui Chenzi. The hair of the person descending from the sky danced in the air, making him look like dragons dancing in the sky. His skin was incredibly white, like snow, and it was a sight that no one would ever forget at first glance. There was a cracked, broken mark at the center of his brows. That mark was in the shape of a desert, and waves of divine essence spread out from it, causing Su Ming's heart to tremble. Ancestral spirit? An antecedental spirit? Su Ming's pupils shrank. It is I, the leader of the Sand Earthlings, Long Di, who is blessed by you. I have disturbed your slumber, and all of this is because the Sand Earthlings are facing the danger of being exterminated. This person has killed more than 10,000 of our people. He killed the spirit you bestowed upon us. The illusory old man spoke in a forlorn voice. When the godlike body appeared in the sky, he had already knelt down on the ground. All the Sand Earthlings around him were kneeling on the ground and worshiping him. The zealous look on their faces made it seem as if they could burn their souls. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1032. Su Ming's expression was aloof. With Su Hui in his arms, he lifted his head and looked at the gigantic body in the sky, as well as the pale face. A sigh came from the sky. The gigantic giant in the sky did not open its eyes. As it sighed, its words reverberated in the air. This is a race I favor. They are my people. You shall be buried with the void. The intermittent words spread in all directions, bringing with them a vast, mighty pressure. It was as if laws were contained in those words. At the instant they reverberated in the air, the sand around Su Ming started spinning, and the gigantic body in the sky opened its mouth slightly. An indescribable suction force shot out from its mouth. Immediately, the sand on the ground danced in the air. An endless amount of sand rose up and charged towards the giant's mouth. The sand vortex around Su Ming immediately turned into a whirlwind that swept up Su Ming's body as if it wanted to devour him. Even a broken spirit dares to think of burying me. Su Ming laughed coldly. Su Hui had already fainted and did not know what was happening around her. She fell into Su Ming's arms and did not move. With Su Hui in his left hand, Su Ming lifted his right hand and pushed it against the ground. With it, the ground immediately started rumbling. The vortex around him froze for a moment. At the same time, Su Ming did not need the suction force to move him. He rose from the ground on his own and charged towards the giant's mouth in the sky. When he was in midair, Su Ming formed a seal with his right hand and pointed forward. Immediately, a mountain appeared in front of him. Most of the mountain was white, and it looked like clouds. However, at the top of the mountain, there was a layer of black that turned into a malicious spirit. Half of the spirit's body was sprawled on the mountain rock, and in its right hand was a black bat. This was Dao Avenue Mountain, which Su Ming had obtained from the Yu family. This treasure did not need divine essence to be used, and its power was extraordinary. Once Su Ming brought it out and pointed forward, Dao Avenue Mountain immediately grew infinitely larger and charged toward the giant in the sky. The giant in the sky still had his eyes closed, but his inhalation had clearly become faster. It was just a little faster, but the power of the divine ability that manifested around him had more than doubled. The suction force instantly turned into sharp blades. Booming sounds came from Dao Avenue Mountain, which was charging towards the giant. As the mountain trembled, Su Ming formed a seal with his right hand and pointed forward again. A roar immediately rang out from Dao Avenue Mountain. The malicious spirit on the mountain seemed to have come to life, and it separated itself from Dao Avenue Mountain. As it roared, the bat in its right hand let out a piercing screech before it swiftly charged out and turned into a long arc that charged towards the giant in the sky. At this moment, the huge figure in the sky seemed to be like a mortal. When he inhaled, he would inevitably exhale. He finished inhaling and suddenly exhaled from his mouth. The wind roared, and a large amount of cracks appeared on the surface of Dao Kuei Mountain. The mountain was sent tumbling backward like a kite. Even the ghoul was howling, unable to stabilize its body, as if it was about to be blown away. The bat couldn't even get close to the mountain. Su Ming felt a violent gust of wind crashing into his face, as if it wanted to shatter his entire body and make him fuse with space. As his body tumbled backwards, intense pain instantly spread through his body. In fact, Su Hui, who was in his arms, started showing signs of her flesh and bones being separated from her body. Su Ming turned around swiftly and used his back as a barrier to fight against the violent gust of wind. At the same time, he saw the mocking and smug look on the illusory old man's face, as well as the bloodthirst and excitement on the faces of the tens of thousands of sand earthlings around him. A piercing glare shone in Su Ming's eyes. He formed a seal with his right hand and bit the tip of his tongue to cough up a mouthful of blood. Once it fused with the seal, it immediately turned into a layer of blood fog. Rumbling sounds echoed in the air, and a white mountain rock shot out from within it. Peace arrives when the elephant is here swiftly manifested, and the palm-sized mountain rock swiftly swelled up. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a gigantic elephant that could trample on the sky. At the same time, the gigantic scale appeared, and a piercing roar echoed in the air. The malicious spirit from before had seized the scale once it saw it. Su Ming's long hair danced in the air, and his robes fluttered. The divine essence runic symbols in his eyes shone rapidly, and with each flash, the mighty pressure from peace arrives when the elephant is here would become even greater. Malicious spirit. Su Ming growled. The malicious spirit immediately turned around with the scale in hand. Its body swelled up endlessly, and the scale in its hand also grew exponentially. Its size and strength depended on the amount of divine essence Su Ming had. If he had enough divine essence, then it could grow endlessly. Weigh the elephant. Su Ming formed a seal with his hand and said in a cold voice once again. The malicious spirit roared. As its body grew larger, it lifted the scale, and with a swing, peace arrives when the elephant is here landed on the scale. By its side, Dao Avenue Mountain turned into the scale's weight. This elephant weighs 7 taels of silver. After using the malicious spirit to weigh the elephant several times, Su Ming had already figured out some of the rules. When he weighed the elephant, the heavier it was, the better. That represented how much divine essence he had gathered. And when he weighed his enemy, the lighter it was, the better. That represented how much he could weaken his enemy's combat abilities. At that moment, as the malicious spirit spoke, the gigantic elephant on the scale lifted its head and let out a roar. It leaped up, and with an indescribable speed, it charged towards the giant in the sky. It was so fast that it crashed into the gigantic body in the sky with a bang while facing the wind that blew towards it. Booming sounds surged into the sky, and tremors reverberated in all directions. A vast ripple tumbled backwards in the sky, and Su Ming coughed up blood. He retreated swiftly, and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. Divine essence. A buzzing voice tumbled out of the giant's mouth in the sky. You are a spirit, but you should still be buried in emptiness. When the giant spoke, he still did not open his eyes, but he lifted his right hand slowly and charged towards Su Ming. He sliced through the air, and the size of his finger made Su Ming feel as if he was facing a master of fate, lives, and death. Ikang. In the face of a life and death crisis, Su Ming called out to his Ikang clone from the depths of his heart without any hesitation. He lifted his right hand and swung it outwards, then raised it upwards. As he spoke in his heart, the world immediately roared, and a gigantic shadow manifested behind him. It was a tree, and it was the projection of Su Ming's Ikang clone. When the tree appeared, Su Ming's level of cultivation increased exponentially. At the same time, the giant's hand in the sky came to an abrupt halt in midair. Ikang. One of the giant's eyes flew open. It was a yellow eye with a vertical pupil. The edges of the pupil were burning with flames, and it was staring fixedly at the illusory Ikang behind Su Ming. Su Ming did not say a single word. If he wanted to summon his Ikang clone, he had to first form the projection of his clone. Once the projection appeared, he could use his soul as a guide to open up a path in space so that his Ikang clone could move through space. At that moment, the projection was swiftly gathering together, and he would need around a dozen breaths before he could open up the path to space. In the ancient ballad, Ikang, the ancestral spirit who was lucky enough to obtain the power of eternal life. You have also become so weak. The legend is real. Could it be that the legend is real? The giant in the sky mumbled as he stared at Su Ming's Ikang projection with his left eye. After the disaster of each aeon, Old Man Extermination will reactivate the power of cycles of life and death, and he will create the ballad of all lives again. In that ballad, the quota for eternal life will appear again. All the spirits of all lives can be written into the ballad, and they will be sent to the heavenly ship to the vast sky. During the disaster of this aeon, they will live eternally. You are so weak. You have existed for even longer than I have, and now you have reached your end. The gigantic figure in the sky suddenly laughed. His laughter was like thunder, and his right hand, which had stopped in midair, sped up and charged towards Su Ming. Su Ming's pupil shrank. When he lifted his right hand, he sucked in a deep breath. His Ikang clone still needed a few breaths before he could arrive, and based on that amount of time, the arm of the person in the sky would definitely arrive first. Su Ming had already made preparations to enter the dimension in the fragment. Once he worked together with the dimension, his Ikang clone would be able to move through the dimension in its entirety. The presence of the black stone fragment spread out from his soul, and faint black ripples spread out from his body. At the instant Su Ming was about to step into the dimension in the fragment, a change suddenly occurred. At the instant the right hand of the giant in the sky was 10,000 feet away from Su Ming, he froze once again. In fact, his arms started trembling. He flew open his right eye, revealing a crimson pupil that had a whirlwind swirling around it. This was the first time he had opened both of his eyes. Disbelief appeared in his two completely different pupils and eyes at that moment. His right hand was not the only one trembling. His entire body was trembling, and as he did so, it was as if the entire sky was trembling. As ripples spread out, excitement that had never appeared on the face of the giant in the sky appeared on his face. Your body, I can sense it. This isn't just a Kang's power. This is the presence of the seed of life extermination. There's no mistaking it. I've gone to Old Man Extermination's place 30,000 something times and offered countless sacrifices, but I've never obtained a spot. You're not a king? You're the predecessor of life extermination who has reactivated the seed of life extermination. As the giant in the sky trembled, excitement that could not be hidden appeared in his eyes. He swiftly pulled back his right hand, and his body swiftly turned around in the sky. He was no longer lying down, but stood up. When he stood up, the world roared. Those who stood under his feet could not see just how tall he was. There was no end to him, but he did not stand up completely. Instead, he slowly bent his body and knelt down in front of Su Ming. Please forgive my offense. Please grant me the right to obtain eternal life once more. Please write down my name in the ballad you will reactivate. Antecedental spirit of the sand earthlings, Sui Yun Jin Chong Lin. Su Ming was momentarily stunned. He swiftly remembered the other name of the black stone fragment, the seed of life extermination. He also remembered the ancient, broken ship in the galaxy, the old man on it, and everything he had seen previously. An ancient ballad. Su Ming's ears seemed to echo with the voice he had heard before. Do you still have recommendation tickets? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1033. If the birth and destruction of a world is the duration of a song, when the song ends, the world will disappear. How will you choose the rhythm of the song? If the life and death of a person is the duration of a song, when the song ends, the life will also end. How will you choose? Who will you write in the lyrics and sing to yourself? There's a ballad that sings about the passage of an aeon. During that passage of time, it is time. The creator of the ballad could write names on it and have them accompany the ballad so that they would echo in time for all eternity. They could never die. In the ancient past, there were 9 living beings and 4 races. Their names were written in the ballad, and as the ballad sang, they shone brilliantly during the passage of an aeon. Right then, the ballad had already reached its end. It had not ended, but it would definitely end. The time they had right then was to write a new score for the rebirth of life extermination. Su Ming stared at the giant in the sky kneeling in front of him. He stared at his gigantic body, but for some unknown reason, he saw a thick aura of death from the giant. This was a living being who was so old that he had reached the end of his life. He was still alive, but he was like a candle that had burned to its bottom and was about to be extinguished. Please write me in your ballad. I am willing to offer up everything I have. The giant lowered his head and said in anguish. From a moment he noticed that the person before him possessed the presence of life extermination. He had given up on all thoughts of obtaining it. This was an item that could not be snatched away or snatched away. If the item did not acknowledge him, perhaps he could still snatch it away. But once the seed of life extermination was reactivated and fused with the person it acknowledged, then no matter who or what power they had, they could destroy the person it acknowledged, but they could not destroy the seed of life extermination, and neither could they fuse with it again. The person who destroyed it would also forever lose the right to be written in the ballad. This matter had always existed in the giant's ancient memories. Su Ming was silent. After a long while, he imitated the old man he saw in the dimension in the fragment and spoke slowly and calmly. What will you offer up as an offering? When Su Ming said those words, there was an ancient air to his voice. The black stone fragment in his soul exuded waves of ancient presence. It existed in Su Ming's body, and as it slowly sank down, it spread out slightly, causing Su Ming to look as if he had turned into the old man in the past. The giant raised his head, and his gaze fell on the ground. With a flash, the tens of thousands of sand earthlings on the ground immediately let out miserable screams. Their bodies instantly melted and turned into sand mounds on the ground. The illusory old man's body trembled. Everything had happened too quickly, and he couldn't adapt to it at all. When he saw all his clan members dying, he trembled and was about to retreat, but when the god spirit of his clan focused on him, his body turned into sand that was blown away by the wind. The 100,000-meter tall statue and the old man's physical body on top of it also dissipated. In that instant, the entire desert lost all life. Grains of sand that looked like crystals flew out from the ground. Each grain of sand represented a life. They gathered together and turned into a vase that floated in front of Su Ming. This is the source of life of the sand earthlings. This is my first offering. Please take it. The giant's eyes burned brightly as he looked at Su Ming. Su Ming met his gaze. After a moment, he slowly lifted his right hand and seized the vase in front of him. At the instant he did so, a black vortex appeared on his palm. The vortex was not formed by Su Ming's will. Instead, the black stone fragment in his soul had manifested on its own in his right hand. Once it devoured the vase, it sent out a wisp of black thread. The black thread instantly charged towards the giant and fused into his back. The giant shuddered, and excitement appeared in his eyes. He might have been certain that Su Ming was the person who had reactivated the seed of life extermination, but there had still been a hint of hesitation in his heart. Yet at that moment, when he saw the black thread he would obtain after he offered his seed of life extermination in ancient times, the hesitation in his heart instantly disappeared. He was now incredibly certain of the identity of the person before him. My life has come to an end, but I can still attack for you 3 more times. This is my second offering, and also all I can do for now. There was an old air to the sand giant's voice. As it echoed in the air, it seemed to be waiting for Su Ming's reply. I can promise you that I will write your name in the ballad, but after you attack 3 times, you must give me your divine essence as your third offering, Su Ming said calmly. As long as my divine soul remains, I will have eternal life. I will keep my promise. The giant remained silent for a moment before his ancient voice echoed in the air. His body gradually dissipated until he turned into a yellowish sand bracelet that floated in front of Su Ming. There was an indistinct face on the bracelet, and it was naturally the sand spirit. Su Ming stared at the bracelet. After some time, he picked it up and put it into his storage bag. Then, he looked at the space around him. At that moment, it was dead silent. After remaining silent for a moment, Su Ming rubbed the center of his brows. Everything just now had happened too suddenly, and he had many thoughts in his head. At that moment, he calmed down and began to think quietly. After a long while, he instinctively touched his neck. There might be nothing there, but he felt as if he could touch the black stone fragment. The various things about that item slowly appeared before his eyes as he experienced it. Seed of life extermination. Life extermination's rebirth, composing a ballad. Su Ming's experiences in the fragment's dimension appeared in his head. The ancient ship should be the heavenly ship the sand spirit had mentioned. After some time, Su Ming sucked in a deep breath and no longer thought about the things that still left him slightly perplexed. He dispersed Ikang's projection and released the cultivation base he had fused with his clone. Then, with the unconscious Su Hui in his arms, he charged forward. Several days later, Su Ming followed the mark he had left in the past and arrived at the end of the desert filled with death. When he was at the edge, he turned his head around and cast a glance at the desert behind him. He could sense that the desert was moving towards death. There was no longer any signs of life in it. As he watched, he suddenly came to understand why the black stone fragment was known as the seed of life extermination. After remaining silent for a moment, Su Ming turned his head around and walked out of the desert. Before him was a galaxy. It was incredibly clean, and when he cast his gaze over it, he could not see much dust or decay. It was like a calm pond, and he could vaguely see a planet right in front of him. It was a cultivation planet that had been split in half, as if it had been cut in half by someone. At that moment, there were still some connections between the two halves, but when Su Ming looked over, he saw that it was a wasteland. When you walk out of the desert, what you will see in the galaxy will be my tribe. Dgomo Shah's words before he left echoed in Su Ming's ears. He stared at the broken cultivation planet and walked towards it quietly. He gradually got closer. In the silence, Su Ming stared at the cultivation planet, and his footsteps became faster. When unknown amount of time passed, he closed in on the cultivation planet. The decay of time filled the galaxy, causing all those who saw it to be immersed in it, as if they themselves had also become ancient. Su Ming walked forward quietly. When he got closer, he saw that there seemed to be an endless amount of wasteland on the left half of the cultivation planet. Among them was a broken statue. When Su Ming looked at the statue in the distance, he felt a stab of pain in his heart. He moved and instantly appeared on the cultivation planet. He stood on a black piece of land, and before him was an endless stretch of wasteland. Death, the bloodiness that existed in the passage of time, the ancientness and silence were the only themes in this place. The statue, standing tall in the wasteland, had lost its right arm. It was a gigantic statue covered in black fur. Sitting on its head was an old man. That old man was dressed in a robe whose color could not be seen clearly. He had his head lifted and was looking into the distance. This was also a statue. Su Ming stared at the old man and put down the still unconscious Su Hui in his arms. He walked over slowly and descended on the statue's head. He stood in front of the old man's statue and stared at the familiar face. Memories of the past rose in his head. The old man who always liked to change his clothes when he was in the Ninth Summit. The old man who brought him to the land of the shamans so that he could get used to the battlefield. The old man who taught him the art to clear his mind and helped him find a home in Freezing Sky Clan. At that moment, he was right before him. Su Ming stared at the statue in a daze, and tears fell from his eyes. He knelt down quietly and kowtowed 9 times toward the statue. Master! His tears fell on the statue and spread out, sinking into the fine cracks on the statue, leaving behind only a wet stain. 1,000 years ago, this was the tribe where I was born. A low voice echoed in the area. The source of the voice came from an abandoned house not too far away. There was a thin and frail man sitting there alone. Naturally, he was Dgyo Shah. He lowered his head and touched the house beneath him. His voice traveled through the ruins, and there was sadness, nostalgia, and a bitterness that could not be wiped away. The old man in front of you is the patriarch of our tribe. He doesn't like to talk, and most of the time, he just looks into the distance silently. The place he's looking at is our tribe's sacred mountain, and it is also the symbol of our tribe. The patriarch called that place the 9th mountain. The patriarch said that he had 5 disciples in his life, and each of them made him proud. He believed that his 6 disciples would one day become the center of attention in the entire universe, and they would spread their fame to this place so that he would know of them. Which of the patriarch's disciples are you? Master only has 4 disciples, and that mountain is not called the 9th mountain either. It's called the 9th summit. Su Ming mumbled as he looked at the statue. A barely noticeable shudder ran through Dgyo Shah's body. He lifted his head slowly and looked at Su Ming. There are 5 stones in front of you. You can place your hand on them. Ahem, let's discuss this. How many monthly votes do you want? To be continued. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1034. Love. Friendship, love, familial love, and kindness were the things that supported a person's life. Their expressions were one of joy and sorrow. His love for his hometown in Dark Mountain, his elders' kindness, his companions' friendship, and the women in his life who were filled with love, but not love. All of these were Su Ming's precious memories. The 9th Summit's love was between familial love and kindness. It had already melted into his blood and was branded into his memories, turning into another source of warmth besides his mother's whispers in the darkness. This love and warmth were the source that allowed Su Ming to continue walking forward when he closed his eyes in the dark. In the end, he was still a person with flesh and blood. Even if he had endless divine abilities, even if he was ancient, even if he killed people like flies, even if his hands were stained with blood, when he closed his eyes, the thing that appeared the most in his mind was the carefree laughter he heard when he was in Dark Mountain and the warmth he felt when he was protected by his senior brothers and master in the 9th Summit. But reality was cruel. It was as if all his longing had been reduced to fragments that turned into thousands of twists and turns. They were stranded in the pool of memories. He stretched out his hand, but he would never be able to fish out everything. There would only be fragments. He really wanted to use his divine ability to freeze these fleeting images, but vaguely, there was always a pebble that stirred up ripples in the pool, knocking on his memories. Many things that had happened in the past turned into a single word that echoed in the silent ruins. He looked at the statue before him and the ancient air about it. How could he forget it? Su Ming knelt down beside the statue, and tears fell from his eyes. Dgomo Sha's voice reached his ears and left again. Su Ming did not seem to have heard it. He looked at his master's statue quietly, as if time had stopped because of him. When an unknown amount of time passed, Su Ming lowered his head and saw 5 stones the size of a palm by his master's statue's feet. They were placed there and connected to the giant statue. It was as if they had already been there when the statue was first built. Su Ming looked at the stones, and his gaze landed on the 4th one. There was a hint of purple to it, and it was slightly different from the other 4. When Su Ming's gaze landed on it, he felt as if his soul was being led away, and his gaze became hazy. These 5 stones were left behind by the elder. He said that if his disciples come one day, they will find a stone that belongs to each of them. If they can make these stones melt, then there is no need to doubt that they are his disciples, Dgomo Sha said in a low voice. Su Ming looked at the 4th stone, then lifted his right hand and slowly pressed it against it. At the instant his right hand touched the stone, Dgomo Sha's eyes focused, and he looked at it carefully. He saw a ray of purple light. That light instantly surged into the sky and illuminated the entire universe. Su Ming's body fused into it, and when he looked over, he was indistinct. Su Ming trembled. The instant the purple light spread out, he could sense Tian Xiezi's presence strongly. That presence seemed to be around him, as if it had always existed in the passage of time, waiting for his disciple to arrive. After a long while, the purple light disappeared. Su Ming stood beside Tian Xiezi's statue. The 5 stones on the ground had now become 4. Dgomo Sha greets 4th senior brother. Once Dgomo Sha saw this, he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed towards Su Ming without any hesitation. Su Ming did not speak. His gaze fell on the 5th stone beside the statue. Then he looked at Dgomo Sha. What did you call me? A fierce glare appeared in Su Ming's eyes. I am a disciple in name that the elder took in after he came to Divine Essence Star Ocean and was educated by the 9th tribe. The elder told me about the divine abilities of his 4 disciples. You can awaken the 4th stone. Based on what the elder said before he left, you are Su Ming. Dgomo Sha lifted his head and looked at Su Ming. Among the 4 disciples Master took in, I'm the most ordinary. Eldest senior brother is the Lord of 9 Li. 2nd senior brother is the king of all phantoms, and 3rd senior brother is a master of runes and seals. You, what right do you have to become our junior brother? Su Ming's expression was calm, but his words were fierce, and there was a faint chill in them. He was no longer the immature teenager who did not have enough experiences. He had experienced far too many things and had a deep understanding of the cruelty of the world. He would not easily believe in a person. Even if this person called him 4th senior brother, even if this person was truly his master's 5th disciple, there was still a change in all of this. Besides, this was not something that concerned Su Ming alone. This was something that the 4 of them shared. Acknowledging a junior brother was not child's play. Dgomo Sha remained silent for a moment before he said in a low voice, I am very ordinary. Even when I was in the tribe, I was still ordinary. I don't know why the elder took me in as a disciple in name, but before he left, he told me the names of his 4 disciples and told me to come here often to wait for his disciples. Perhaps one day they would come, he said softly. Su Ming stared into the distance. If the cultivation planet had not been split apart, he would have been able to see the 9th summit that had been built. After some time, Su Ming asked calmly, why is this place abandoned? Thick killing intent and hatred shone in Dgomo Sha's eyes as he said through gritted teeth, the 4 races surrounded us. Why did they surround us? Su Ming asked faintly. Djo Shah clenched his fists, and his voice echoed in the air. It's because of the appearance of the fifth stone, and because the elder obtained one. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he finally asked, "Is Master still around?" 1,000-something years ago, the elder lured the four races away with the fifth stone for the sake of his tribesmen. I don't know whether he is dead or alive, but over the years, I've investigated in secret and found some clues. The four races did not have the fifth stone, so I'm guessing that the elder did not die in the past. Djo Shah looked at Su Ming and told him everything he knew. "What's the fifth stone?" Su Ming asked again. "Once you have it, you can use it to point the way in the fifth ocean at the core of Divine Essence Star Ocean, and in the end, you can step into the fifth true world that has disappeared in the passage of time." Djo Shah's voice reached Su Ming's ears, and he fell silent again. "How can you obtain the fifth stone? How did it appear?" Su Ming looked at Djo Shah. "There are two ways to obtain the fifth stone. One of them is to snatch it from the person who has it, and the other is to wait for the fifth kiln to be activated. It is unknown when the fifth kiln will be activated. Sometimes it will be activated once every 10 years, sometimes it will be activated once every 100 years, and sometimes it will only be activated once every 10,000 years or even longer. Once the fifth kiln is activated, it will erupt with flames that will burn the entire Divine Essence Star Ocean. Even the galaxies beyond Divine Essence Star Ocean will be able to see this. The flames will continue burning for a period of time. This period of time is a form of torture and test for all living beings. They need to avoid the flames, or else their bodies and souls will be destroyed. However, there are still some powerful warriors who will head towards the flames and step into the fifth kiln. Perhaps they will obtain a great serendipity in there, and their bodies will be refined to become saints. They might also obtain enchanted treasures, and the hardest to obtain among them would be the fifth stone. However, there is a higher possibility that they would die inside. Legend has it that the fifth kiln is not something from Divine Essence Star Ocean, but an enchanted furnace from the fifth true world in the past. When it burns, it is a supreme treasure that can provide endless spiritual energy to the fifth true world. However, as the fifth true world disappeared, the furnace appeared in Divine Essence Star Ocean. No one can turn it into an enchanted treasure. They can only watch it erupt time and time again as time passes, and people step into it in search of serendipity. As time goes by, the fifth kiln became one of the four great mysteries of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Djo Shah cast a glance at Su Ming before he continued speaking. As for the other three great mysteries, one of them is the birth and arrival of the entire Divine Essence Star Ocean. Some vortexes in space will occasionally appear in Divine Essence Star Ocean, and once they fall into them, no one will be able to walk out. We call those vortexes the swamps of Divine Essence Star Ocean. They might lead to an unknown world. The second mystery is that there is no end to Divine Essence Star Ocean. Even if you find the core, no matter how many years pass, you will never be able to walk out of Divine Essence Star Ocean. It's as if this place is truly boundless. The third mystery is the birthplace of all ancestral spirits. It is also known as All Spirits Hall. Legend has it that the secret of Divine Essence Star Ocean's origin lies there. It's a pity that every single time All Spirits Hall appears, only those who are masters of fate, and fate can enter, which is why it's difficult for outsiders to know just what is inside. Djo Shah's voice echoed in the air as he spoke of the secrets of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he asked again, "Do you know where Master went?" "The entrance to the fifth true world. In fact, there's a high possibility that Master has already reached the fifth true world." Djo Shah immediately answered without any hesitation. Su Ming pondered over it for a moment. Just as he was about to speak, a piercing whistle suddenly came from Djo Shah's body. There were 2 long whistles and 3 short whistles, giving off an incredibly urgent feeling. At the instant that sound appeared, Djo Shah's expression changed. He turned around swiftly and looked into the distance. At the same time, anxiety appeared in his eyes, and he too let out a whistle. There were 3 short whistles and 1 long whistle, as if he was replying in some sort of language. Once he spoke, another whistle came from his body. This time, there were 4 long whistles and 3 short whistles. Djo Shah's expression changed completely. Without any hesitation, he moved forward, but once he took a few steps forward, he turned his head around and looked at Su Ming. His usually aloof eyes were now filled with a hint of complicated emotions and nostalgia. I completed the task the patriarch gave me. He asked me to wait for his disciple here every once in a while. It doesn't matter whether you acknowledge me or not. I, Djo Shah, am the patriarch's disciple when I am alive, and when I die, I will still be the soul of the patriarch's disciple. Once he finished saying these words, a hint of resolution and determination shone in Djo Shah's eyes. He turned his head around and turned into a long arc that instantly charged into the distance. Su Ming fell silent. He looked at his master's statue and sighed softly. With a swing of his arm, he swept up Su Hui and took a step into the distance. His body instantly disappeared, and as he shifted, he appeared beside Djo Shah, who was charging forward in the distant galaxy. You? Djo Shah was stunned. Qijian has organized a book critic selection activity. I would like to appeal to everyone to help Dreamless, Rain Watching, Little Demon, Long Sleeve, Under the Moon, Bamboo, Imeng, etc. All the nicknames exist. The address of the voting is in the news on the front page. Thank you very much, everyone. There's also an encyclopedic character voting. Su Ming and Wang Lin are voting. If you have a vote, don't waste it. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Qijian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1035. What happened? Su Ming asked calmly. Djo Shah remained silent for the span of a few breaths. When he looked at Su Ming, there was a hint of gratitude on his face. The tribe is in danger. It should be the invasion of the hearers. In the past, the Elder shifted the tribe's planet from the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean to this place. Over the past 1,000 years, we have been constantly migrating and hiding. The 4 races might not be chasing after us directly, but the small races that belong to them have been continuously causing my tribe to wither away over the years, Djo Shah said through gritted teeth. In the beginning, we had nearly 100,000 people, but now we have less than 1,000 people. Bring me to your tribe, Su Ming said calmly, with Su Hui in his arms. Djo Shah nodded. With one move, blood fog erupted from his body, and his speed instantly increased by several fold. Su Ming took a step forward beside him, and with just one step, he was already far away. About 2 hours later, Djo Shah's footsteps suddenly came to a halt. He looked around him carefully, then brought out a stone from his bosom. Once he crushed it, he scattered it outwards. Immediately, a vortex the size of a palm appeared not too far away, and it absorbed the stone powder that scattered there. The vortexes in Divine Essence Star Ocean might be mysterious, but after countless years of research, the people here have discovered that some of these vortexes are endless abysses that lead to unknown places, but some of them are connected to another vortex in another part of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Once we find these safe vortexes, we can form a natural relocation formation. With their existence, we can make the distance beneath our feet no longer seem far. The records of these vortexes are the core of each tribe's treasures, and they cannot be discovered by outsiders. In fact, only a few people in the tribe know these secrets. The Elder used some unknown method to discover quite a number of the relocation vortexes in the 9th tribe in the past. It was also because of this that the tribe's planet was shifted from the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean to the periphery. In fact, if it weren't for the existence of these vortexes, it would have been impossible for my people to still exist even after being continuously chased down for 1,000 years. Besides, there are quite a number of vortexes that the other tribes still don't know about. Djo Shah clearly did not treat Su Ming as an outsider. While observing the stone powder around him, he explained everything in detail. Once we return to the tribe, I will tell you all the records of the vortexes. It'll be much more convenient for you in Divine Essence Star Ocean. Djo Shah's eyes focused, and he looked at the spot where the stone fragments had disappeared. He raised his right hand and grabbed in that direction. Just touch it with your body. Don't open your eyes during the teleportation. After about 10 breaths of time, we will be able to walk out of the other vortex. Djo Shah's voice was still echoing in the air when his body seemed to have been sucked into the fist-sized whirlpool in an instant. He was sucked inside, as if the edges of the whirlpool were soft and elastic, and they could devour everything. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. After a moment of pensive silence, he took a step forward and touched the vortex. At the instant he did so, he immediately felt himself being placed in a layer of softness. Almost at the moment this feeling appeared, he immediately noticed a great suction force pulling his body into the vortex with a bang. Su Ming did not close his eyes. He kept them open. He could sense that his body was being led forward by some sort of guiding power. And before him, he saw Djo Shah, who had his eyes closed. Besides that, Su Ming also saw a colorful world. Countless jellyfish-like living creatures shone with light as they floated about. When Su Ming looked down, he saw that there was no end to the area beneath him. It was pitch black. When Su Ming looked over, his eyes focused. He saw 6 brownish-yellow candles suddenly lighting up in a small region of the darkness beneath him. At the same time, an enraged roar came from within the darkness. The instant that roar spread out, the colorful jellyfish creatures in the area quickly scattered. Soon after, Su Ming could clearly see the 6 candles burning in the endless darkness beneath him as the roars rang out. They swiftly grew larger, as if 3 living beings were swiftly rushing out of the darkness. "Close your eyes." An anxious voice immediately came from not too far away from Su Ming. It was Djo Shah. His body was being led forward, and when he heard the furious roar, he still had his eyes closed, but anxiety appeared on his face. Su Ming did not close his eyes. He kept them open and stared at the endless darkness beneath him. The 6 burning candles closed in on Su Ming. In about the span of 6 to 7 breaths, the enraged roars turned into a powerful impact, and a completely black horse that was treading on flames appeared before Su Ming's eyes. The horse was completely black and surrounded by flames. There was a murderous look in its eyes, and there were 2 dragon heads on its back swinging about. Enraged roars reverberated in the air as it charged towards Su Ming. A powerful, mighty pressure erupted from the strange beast body. It was so strong that Su Ming knew once again that masters of fate, lives, and death were definitely not the strongest cultivators could reach. "Don't look at anything in this place." "Huh." Djo Shah's voice eventually turned into a sigh. His body disappeared from the colorful world without a trace, a telling sign that he had gone through the process of relocation and was sent out. The black horse with the 2 dragon heads drew closer at that moment. Its roars shook the area, and Su Ming could even feel that the guiding power on his body was about to crumble. He narrowed his eyes, but he still did not close them. At the instant Su Ming saw the horse, he had fallen in love with it. Its murderous presence matched his murderous aura, and the path it trod while covered in flames also matched a thought that had appeared in the depths of Su Ming's heart after he heard Djo Shah's words. Su Ming was incredibly satisfied with its speed. It had only used the span of a few breaths to charge over from the seemingly endless darkness, and Su Ming could not find any flaws in the horse's power either. When Su Ming opened his eyes, he did not bother hiding the look in his eyes. His eyes were born from his heart, and it caused the black horse with the 2 dragon heads to feel a rarely seen provocation. It also noticed Su Ming's intention to enslave it. This caused the beast's enraged roars to become even stronger. It became even faster. However, to Su Ming, This was just a short relocation. The span of a dozen-something breaths had already ended, and his body was swiftly disappearing. "You are mine." At the instant Su Ming's body disappeared, he said those words flatly. He knew that the black horse would hear him and would definitely be able to understand him. He did not know whether there had been anyone before him who had said the same words to the black horse. If there had been, then Su Ming's actions would not have been of much use. But if there had not been, then Su Ming's words would turn into a seed that would be planted in the black horse's heart. As long as it remembered that someone had said those words, then that seed would exist. This was Su Ming's art. It had transformed into an art that would exist as long as he believed in it. In terms of level, it surpassed the great art of Berserker Seed. Roar! As the black horse's roars echoed in the air, Su Ming disappeared from the colorful world. When he reappeared, he was standing in the galaxy of divine essence Star Ocean. Before him was Djo Mo Sha, who was smiling wryly. "Fourth senior brother, it's my fault for not telling you clearly. You can't look at anything in the world in the vortex. Once you look at it and remember what that place looks like, you will be remembered by the strange power in the world in the vortex. Unless you stop using the relocation vortex, then once you use it again, the living beings you see will not let you leave. Even if you manage to leave by a stroke of luck, as long as you continue using the relocation vortex, it will become increasingly dangerous." Djo Mo Sha sighed and charged forward. He was anxious for the safety of his tribe, and he was also slightly annoyed by Su Ming's previous actions. Su Ming took a step forward and suddenly asked, "Do you know why Master only took you in as a disciple in name and not officially?" Djo Mo Sha was momentarily stunned. "It's because my potential is normal, very normal," Djo Mo Sha said in a low voice. "You're wrong." Su Ming shook his head. "Who told you that you can't open your eyes in the world in the vortex?" Su Ming continued asking. "There's no need for anyone to tell me this. This is common sense. It's common sense that almost everyone who lives here knows. Even if someone opens their eyes out of curiosity, not long after, they will no longer be able to walk out of the relocation vortex. Over the years, this sort of thing has happened far too many times, and I've seen far more of it than you have," Djo Mo Sha said, feeling slightly indignant. "Then has there been anyone who has successfully subdued the living beings in the world in the vortex and brought them out?" Su Ming looked at Djo Mo Sha and continued asking. "Never," Djo Mo Sha said without any hesitation. "You're wrong." Su Ming stared at Djo Mo Sha, at his fifth junior brother, who he might not have admitted to it verbally, but had already accepted him in the depths of his heart. Common sense is a circle. If you believe in it, it will exist in your life. It will limit your steps and everything about you. It might be able to protect you, but it will also limit your development. Master only took you in as a disciple in name, not because of your potential, but because you lack the courage to break common sense. Perhaps more accurately speaking, you don't have the will to break common sense. Have you ever wondered why Master could know more vortex tunnels than the other tribes in this place? Have you ever wondered why Master could not be found even when he was chased down by the four races? In fact, I am certain that the Black Giant Undermaster is a ferocious spirit you've never seen before. It's not a beast from Divine Essence Star Ocean, and you've never wondered where it came from, Su Ming said slowly, but when his words landed in Djo Mo Sha's ears, they turned into a thunderous roar. He remembered clearly that the Elder's Black Giant's ferocious spirit was indeed something he had never seen before. That ferocious spirit should have come from the world in the vortex. Master was able to discover more vortex tunnels than the other tribes because he opened his eyes in the world in the vortex and enslaved a ferocious spirit from the world in the vortex. Su Ming said faintly. Djo Mo Sha's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. He stared at Su Ming in a daze. His words echoed in his heart, and each of them caused his heart to tremble. Only at that moment did he suddenly understand why among the four disciples of the Elder, the one he talked about the most was not his eldest senior brother, second senior brother, or third senior brother, but his fourth senior brother standing before him, Jian has organized a book critic selection event. I would like to appeal to all of you to help Dreamless, Rainwatcher, Young Demon, Long Sleeve, Under the Moon, Bamboo, and Meng. All of these nicknames exist. Help these 8 hardcore fans get votes. The address of the voting is in the news on the front page. Thank you, everyone. There's also a person who wants to vote for an encyclopedic character. Su Ming and Wang Lin are there too. Don't waste your votes. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Jian and vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 10:36. When the 5th kiln appeared in the world, its flames would cover the entire divine essence star ocean. The boundless sea of fire would burn all the lives who tried to disrespect it. Those who would charge through the sea of fire would definitely be powerful warriors in the immortal realm. Only they could tread on the sea of fire and head to the 5th kiln to search for death, serendipity, and to search for the 5th true world that had survived the flames of war before it disappeared in the legends. If they could step into the 5th true world, then they could obtain all the resources and power of world planes in the entire true world. They could continue until the disaster of 10,000 worlds was averted, and in one go, they could become masters of fate, lives, and death. This legend spoke of the 5th true world, and it praised the 5th kiln. However, since ancient times, every single time the 5th kiln appeared, there were few who could walk through the sea of fire. This required a person to have a deep epiphany towards the origin of fire and turn into fire. At the very least, they would need a ferocious beast that could dance with fire as their companion. Only then could they walk through the sea of fire. Su Ming's understanding towards fire was not so deep that he understood the origin of fire and all its structures. His understanding towards fire was so deep that he could make fire appear out of nowhere when he breathed. His understanding towards fire was only slightly greater than that of a normal person. After all, he had inherited the legacy of the Fire Berserker, but to Su Ming, the level of the Fire Berserker was already a little too low. This level of understanding towards fire was not enough for him to walk through the sea of fire when the 5th kiln was activated. That was why he needed a ferocious beast that could be born from fire. This sort of ferocious beast was not something that could be found easily. None of the ferocious spirits in Su Ming's memories fulfilled this requirement. But the black horse he saw in the world in the vortex, and its heroic bearing as it moved forward while treading on fire, gave Su Ming a strong feeling at first glance. He had a feeling that this was a ferocious spirit that could bring him through the sea of fire. This was a ferocious beast that could allow him to look down on everything in the sea of fire. That was why he had to obtain this beast. Before the next time the 5th kiln was activated, he had to make this beast his pet. This was very difficult. However, Su Ming had already made his decision. If Lai Shanxiu was the only one missing and Su Ming came to search for clues, then even if he could somewhat guess that there was a high possibility that he had entered the 5th true world, Su Ming would still hesitate. In the end, there was a high possibility that he would choose to give up and return to true Morning Dao world. After all, he wasn't ready yet. However, Tianxia was also added to this matter, and the weight he held in Su Ming's heart became incredibly heavy. Besides, he also wanted to go back and take a look at the Abyss Builder's homeland, the 5th true world. All of these things made Su Ming make up his mind. He wanted to wait for the 5th kiln to be activated in Divine Essence Star Ocean. He wanted to obtain the 5th stone from the 5th kiln and bring it to the 5th ocean at the core of Divine Essence Star Ocean. From there, he would step into the 5th true world. This is my path, a path that was already set when I descended in the barren lands of Divine Essence, Crimson Flame Planet. I tried to break free of it, but in the end, my path still pointed towards the 5th true world. Su Ming walked beside Digio Emosha. He looked at the galaxy in the distance with a calm expression. The reason why I can't break free is because this path wasn't chosen for me by some mysterious will. It's because I've already decided on this path in my own subconscious. An ancient look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. As he grew older and experienced more things, he got used to thinking, got used to being alone, and got used to being alone. A person's world might not be colorful, but in this world where the strong preyed on the weak, a person's life would have a rare peace. After all, he was a person. If the bald crane had not been by his side, Su Ming did not know what his personality would have been like. Perhaps he would have been extreme, prejudiced, or perhaps when he closed his eyes, he would have been like a blade, and when he opened them, hints of blood would have appeared in his eyes. Because I'm from the fifth true world. Su Ming shook his head. He did not agree with this, but he had to suppress the desire to go to the fifth true world to take a look at it. Perhaps it's because of her. As Su Ming walked through the galaxy, the darkness around him made him remember the woman he had sensed in his memories when he was in Western Ring Nebula's foreign lands. She was his mother, who was unfamiliar yet familiar, cold yet warm. It was a woman he had never met before. Or perhaps it's because of her. Su Ming remembered his little sister, who had not called out to him for a long time. He had never experienced true love in his life. It did not matter whether it was by Ling or Yu Xian. They seemed to have disappeared, but they were just catkins in his heart. They floated in the wind and could never land on the ground. Even if they did land, they would fly up again in the wind. Because they were not the only catkins. Su Ming himself was also a catkin without roots in the sky. He floated around without a home, without roots. If there was one thing he had, then it was the feeling of first love when he was ignorant about love. It was a hint of the past rainbow in the gray of his emotions. It was like a sigh in the wind and snow, like the snow that did not turn white even after he walked down it, like the promise he had been unable to fulfill in the past. Some of the ripples from his memories crushed through the light dust of time and shattered to pieces. I don't understand love. I don't understand love. Su Ming sighed softly. His sigh turned into faint ripples in the galaxy. There was sadness contained in those ripples, and it was a flower that no one could understand. It could only bloom its loneliness in the silent darkness. Su Ming stared at the galaxy. He noticed that as he grew older and experienced more things, he would subconsciously immerse himself in his memories. He would always turn his head back to look at all the regrets he had in his life. I'm old because I always remember the time when I was young. Young lost Su. Only when a person is old will he feel sentimental about his entire life. Only then will he count the rainbows in the past. His elder's voice echoed in Su Ming's ears. He had forgotten which year and which season it was, but his voice had a hint of laughter in it. Time trickled by. For hours later, 6 piercing whistles came from Djo Mo Sha's body, interrupting Su Ming's thoughts. Those whistles were incredibly piercing to the ears. They sounded like shrill screams of pain, causing Djo Mo Sha's expression to change. Before he could say anything else to Su Ming, he immediately brought out a medicinal core from his bosom. That medicinal core was black, but when it appeared in his hand, it immediately started moving. That was not a medicinal core. It was the shape of a medicinal core formed by a black centipede hugging itself together. Resolution appeared in Djo Mo Sha's eyes, and he gritted his teeth before swallowing it. Once he did so, black smoke immediately rose from Djo Mo Sha's face. The image of a centipede could be seen faintly on his face, causing him to look incredibly ferocious. I will travel at full speed and spare no expense to use up my life force. The tribe is facing a great danger. If you walk past this galaxy, you will see a floating continent. That is where my tribe is. Once he finished speaking, black smoke immediately spread out from Djo Mo Sha's body. He threw his head back and roared, and with an unprecedented speed, he instantly disappeared. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He had tried shifting before, but the galaxy at that moment was incredibly strange. He could not shift, as if there was a natural barrier around him. At the instant Djo Mo Sha's body disappeared, Su Ming took a step forward, and like a bolt of lightning slicing through the sky, he charged into the distance. He had only moved for a dozen-something breaths when he suddenly heard 7 indistinct whistles coming from the area ahead of him. He had not stopped moving. Instead, he moved even faster. After the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, he saw a floating continent in the galaxy in the distance. There were irregular cracks around the continent, a telling sign that it had been separated from a planet after it crumbled. Shattered mountains could be seen on the land, and the ground was dried up. There were also an endless amount of yellow plants. There were also hundreds of ferocious beasts that were hundreds of feet big. They had sharp blades on their backs and were floating in the air. These ferocious beasts were dressed in battle armor, and on their backs were tall and thin figures whose ears were on their shoulders. There were thousands of similar figures around them. There were also a large number of black insects that were about 10 feet big crawling on the ground. They had turned into a sea of insects that was swiftly spreading outwards. Roars and booming sounds reverberated in all directions. The sea of insects was crashing into a mountain, and there were hundreds of people at the edge of it. Despair appeared on their faces, but they did not retreat. Instead, they continued fighting against the sea of insects. There were also hundreds of people in midair who were exchanging divine abilities against the enemies in the sky. Some of the elderly, the young, the sick, and the disabled could be seen at the mountainside. They looked at the world quietly, and their faces were filled with the will to die. A loud bang reverberated in the area, and the sky looked as if it had been torn apart. DGOMO, Shah took a step forward, and black smoke filled his entire body. The black smoke that spread out turned into a gigantic and ferocious centipede behind him. As its body twisted, it opened its mouth wide at the sea of insects on the ground, and a large amount of black fog instantly gushed out. As the poisonous fog gushed out, DGOMO, Shah's body immediately withered, but not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. However, the killing intent in his eyes grew stronger. His appearance attracted the attention of the people standing on the ferocious beasts in the distance. Compared to cultivators who would usually talk to each other before they fought, these alien races who lived in Divine Essence Star Ocean might have seen DGOMO Shah and knew his identity, but they did not have any intention to speak. Only 7 people flew out and charged towards DGOMO Shah with murderous looks on their faces. At the same time, the thousands of people in the sky lifted their hands at the same time. As they formed seals, an innumerable amount of black beetles in the sea of insects on the ground went berserk. Their bodies shone with a purple hue, and they charged forward without caring about the corrosive effects of the poisonous fog. This scene was reflected in Su Ming's pupils. He moved forward and swiftly closed in on them. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 10:37. The hearers were a small tribe in the periphery of Divine Essence Star Ocean. There were nearly 10,000 people in this tribe, but there were only thousands of warriors among them. If anyone did not know the distribution of the forces of power in Divine Essence Star Ocean, then perhaps they would think that the hearers were a huge tribe the first time they saw them. But those who truly understood Divine Essence Star Ocean would know that there were plenty of such tribes in it. They were like DGOMO Shah's 9th tribe. Perhaps they had once been a huge tribe in Divine Essence Star Ocean, but as time shifted its gaze away from them, they gradually fell into decline until they could no longer survive in the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean. They could only move to the periphery of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Only in this place could they continue growing. All tribes with a history would have complicated connections in Divine Essence Star Ocean. For example, even if the hearers had lived in the periphery of Divine Essence Star Ocean for a long time, they still had close connections with a few big tribes in the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean. With just one order from the big tribes, they could send out all the warriors in their tribe and the ferocious beasts they had reared for years to carry out this siege. When Su Ming saw this, he turned into a long arc, and as he charged forward, the sound of air being sliced apart reverberated in the air, catching the attention of the hearers in the sky. But almost at the instant they turned their heads around, they only saw a blood-red figure charging past them in the span of a breath. It was an arrow. It was an arrow that did not have any corporeal form. as if it was formed from nothingness. It looked like a blood-red shadow in the people's eyes, because once it was shot out, it shot through a dozen-something people's chests and dyed them red with blood. The arrow shot through the thousands of hearers in the sky and landed at the foot of the mountain. Its entire body was rotting in the poisonous fog, but it was still charging forward. It opened its mouth wide in an attempt to devour a member of the ninth tribe. With a bang, the black beetle instantly crumbled. The impact that was stirred up tumbled backwards in all directions, stirring up the fog and forcing the member of the ninth tribe several hundreds of feet backwards. There were no living beings within a circular area of 100 feet where the arrow had landed. There were only a dozen-something dead insects whose bodies had been shattered by the impact. There was also a tall figure dressed in sackcloth. He held a huge bough in his hand, and his long hair danced in the wind. He held a woman in his arms. She was very beautiful, and her eyes were closed, as if she was in deep sleep. "Take care of her for me," Su Ming said flatly, and let go of her. He sent the woman in his arms to the member of the ninth tribe who had just escaped death. She was a member of the ninth tribe with a pale face who had been stunned by Su Ming's arrival. She was a woman, and the danger her tribe faced forced her to fight for her tribe. Almost instinctively, she took over the unconscious Su Hui. Su Ming's eyes were calm. The roars around him surged into the sky. To others, this battle was an incredibly magnificent sight. After all, this was a battle between thousands of people and a sea of tens of thousands of black beetles. However, to Su Ming, this sort of scene was simply insignificant. It did not matter whether it was the battle against the immortal sex when he was in the land of berserkers or the recent battle against the waves of tears. He stood where he was, holding the sand spirit bow in his left hand. He lifted his right hand, and an arrow flew out. The arrow was still invisible, and as it sliced through the air, it landed on the ground in front of him. Booming sounds reverberated in the air, and the area of 100 feet collapsed once again. Without any hesitation, Su Ming fired arrow after arrow. In the end, when he used most of his power, every single arrow that flew out turned into death in an area of several thousands of feet when it landed on the ground. For a period of time, booming sounds rang out nonstop in the battlefield. Su Ming leaped up from the ground and appeared at the top of the mountain behind him. When he stood there, he drew the bow with his right hand, and arrows charged towards the ground like rain. His level of cultivation was high enough, and he also had a powerful physical body. This caused every single arrow Su Ming shot to be as if he had attacked with his full strength. It could be said that in Su Ming's hands, the damage that erupted from the bow was even greater than that of the person holding it. His appearance and his arrows immediately stirred up an uproar among the ninth tribe and the hearers. Excitement appeared on the faces of the members of the ninth tribe, and their fighting spirit was ignited once more. The strength of Su Ming's arrows was so great that he seemed to be able to control the entire land by himself, causing the sea of insects to continuously disintegrate when the arrows landed on the ground. As the members of the ninth tribe in the sky executed their divine abilities, their spirits were lifted. They would occasionally look towards Su Ming, who was at the top of the mountain. The figure of a person with a bow was deeply branded into their minds. In the eyes of the hearers, Su Ming's appearance immediately threw the battle into chaos, causing the sea of insects on the ground to be unable to move forward. Murderous looks appeared on their faces, and they glared at Su Ming, who was at the top of the mountain. Powerful killing intent appeared in their eyes. Djo Sha roared. The centipede that had turned into behind him immediately left his body. Once it grew to be several thousands of feet big, it charged towards the thousands of hearers. With a calm expression, Su Ming fired another arrow. The ground rumbled, and a pit that was 1,000 feet deep appeared. Then he put down the bow. If one looked down from the sky, they would be able to clearly see that in the direction of the sea of insects about 5,000 zhang away from the foot of the mountain, there was a deep pit. This deep pit surrounded the mountain, forming a line. Besides the members of the ninth tribe, there was not a single black beetle within that line. As for the area beyond that line, there was a densely packed sea of insects, but not a single one of them took half a step into that line. They only roared and hissed angrily. That line had been drawn by Su Ming with an arrow. His aloof, murderous aura lingered in it, along with a callous statement that no words were needed. As long as it was a life form with intelligence, they could sense it. All those who stepped into that line would die. It was not difficult for Su Ming to kill the sea of insects and even the entire Hearers tribe. This was a tribe that did not have any cultivators in Lunar Culpa realm. Right then, the strongest person in this place was only in the later stage of World Plane realm. As for the other Hearers, their levels of cultivation ranged from those in Earth Cultivation realm to those in the middle stage of World Plane realm. A tribe like this could not pose even the slightest bit of threat to Su Ming. He stood on a mountain and did not say a single word, but his existence and his arrow were more intimidating than any words. They could make the sea of insects on the ground not dare to take even half a step forward. This action brought about a rise in his aura, causing Su Ming to look down on them in all the people's eyes as he stood at the top of the mountain. Roar! The old man in the later stage of World Plane realm among the Hearers in the sky let out a low roar, and it turned into two waves of impact. One of them landed on the ground, causing the sea of insects on the ground to become even more violent. In fact, some of them could not withstand it and had the urge to cross the boundary. The other part of the roars turned into a wave of sound that charged into the air in front of Su Ming. The hundreds of members of the Ninth Tribe also charged towards him. At the same time, as the old man roared, the thousands of Hearers around him rushed out. They turned into thousands of long arcs that charged towards the mountain, straight towards the hundreds of members of the Ninth Tribe beyond the mountain. As they rushed out, the sea of insects on the ground let out piercing screeches. The black beetles stepped into the line formed by the pit, intending to cross it. It was especially so for the old Hearer whose level of cultivation was equivalent to those in the later stage of World Plane realm. He kept staring at Su Ming, and killing intent shone in his eyes. He could tell that Su Ming was only in the middle stage of World Plane realm, and he was certain that the bow was the reason why Su Ming could be so strong. He believed that as long as he got close to Su Ming, then with his level of cultivation, he would immediately let this person know the consequences of going against the Hearers. As he let out a cold harumph, he took a step forward. When he lifted his right hand, a rattle drum the size of his palm appeared on his palm. That drum was white, and it was clear that it was made of bone. When it was shaken, thumping sounds reverberated in the air. That sound seemed to have a penetrating force that spread through the area and landed in all the people's ears. As it spread out, even though the sound of the drum was not too loud, even Su Ming could hear it. Almost at the instant he heard it, the old Hearer laughed ferociously. He moved, and with the power of those in the later stage of World Plane realm, he shifted. This was something that was practically impossible, unless he was like Su Ming and had the soul of a powerful warrior in Lunar Culpa realm in his body. He could then use the art of shifting, or else it would be incredibly difficult for him to shift with the power of those in the later stage of World Plane realm. It was especially so when the galaxy in this place could not be shifted at all. Su Ming had tried this before, but the old man's body had instantly disappeared. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. Not a single hint of change could be detected on his face as he watched the sea of insects rush past the line he had drawn. As they spread out swiftly, they stirred up a presence that made it seem as if they wanted to push down the mountain where he was. This time, Su Ming did not draw the bow. He lifted his right hand, lowered his head, and cast a few glances at it before he pushed his palm towards the ground. With it, the world roared, and the ground started trembling furiously. A gigantic palm appeared in the sky and charged towards the ground. It was so quick that in the blink of an eye, it descended on the ground. The ground tumbled, and booming sounds shook the sky and earth at that moment. The black beetles in the sea of insects let out cries of despair, and the swarm that had originally spread out immediately disintegrated. They fled madly in all directions. It was also at that moment that the ripples behind Su Ming distorted. The old man who had disappeared previously took a step forward. With a ferocious smile on his face, he lifted his right hand, intending to strike Su Ming's back. His fingers were pitch black, and wisps of black smoke surrounded them to turn into the souls of black beetles. Just as they were about to touch Su Ming, he saw the palm that had appeared in the sky and the sea of insects on the ground crumble. This scene caused his pupils to shrink. His expression changed drastically, and shock along with disbelief appeared on his face. Ugh. A master of fate, lives, and death. This is impossible. The old man sucked in a sharp breath. In his shock, he could no longer care about injuring Su Ming. Instead, he swiftly retreated in shock, as if he could no longer even think about injuring Su Ming. The only thought in his mind was to leave this place as quickly as possible. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1038. Su Ming did not turn his head back. As his right hand fell, a deafening boom instantly came from the ground. Countless shrill screams of pain were completely drowned out by the booming sounds. As the lingering sounds reverberated in the air, all the people who were fighting against each other in the battlefield shuddered, as if they had been frozen. All their gazes were trained on the ground, and all of them were dumbfounded. There was shock on their faces that could not be hidden. A gigantic palm print that was several hundreds of feet deep was branded on the ground, and within it were countless black beetles that had been reduced to a bloody mess. That palm print was incredibly clear, as if a giant had placed his palm on the ground. The black beetles that had just escaped death were trembling at the edges of the palm print. They lay prone on the ground, not daring to move even a single inch. They could sense the terror that came from that palm print that could destroy their entire tribe. It was a mighty pressure that they could not hope to fight against. Su Ming watched the scene before him calmly. The old hearer's heart was trembling at that moment, and he was swiftly retreating. His heart was filled with regret and fear at that moment. He regretted being so close to this terrifying person before him. He was afraid of that palm strike, which had clearly made him feel as if he could not fight against it. He had never seen a master of fate, lives, and death in his life, but he had heard of the divine abilities of powerful warriors in this realm. At that moment, everything he saw before him echoed in his head, and only the words master of fate, lives, and death could describe it. "I'm not a place where you can come and go as you please," Su Ming said flatly. The old hearer's expression changed drastically. He lifted his right hand, and the wave drum appeared. As he shook it rapidly, he instantly left into the distance. He had already been scared out of his wits by Su Ming's palm strike just then. If he had known that there was such a powerful warrior in the 9th tribe, then no matter what, he would not have brought Hearer tribe here. This was no longer a hunt for the 9th tribe. Hearer tribe had clearly brought upon themselves a danger that could lead to the destruction of their tribe. His pupils constricted, and he began to flee at top speed. He wanted to get out of this place, and he didn't even care about the lives of his fellow tribe members. He wanted to get back to his tribe as quickly as possible, and then mobilize them to move as far away from this place as possible. If he was even a step too slow, then he was certain that what awaited him would be the complete annihilation of his tribe. Su Ming lowered his right hand and patted his storage bag. The gourd immediately appeared and floated above his palm. Su Ming touched it gently a few times. "Treasured gourd, please kill him," Su Ming said flatly. Eyes immediately appeared on the gourd, and they stared at the fleeing old hearer with an aloof gaze. In an instant, a colorful light erupted from within, and a small human holding a blade flew out of the gourd and left without a single sound. After a moment, a shrill scream of pain reverberated in the battlefield that had fallen silent due to Su Ming's palm strike. It was a piercing cry that attracted all the people's gazes. Once the people from the 9th tribe saw this, their spirits were immediately lifted, but when the hearers saw this, their faces instantly turned stark pale. If Su Ming's palm strike had already scared the hearers out of their wits, causing their fighting spirit to fall to its lowest point and great terror to rise within them, then the scene of the old hearer's head being separated from his body was like a death knell that crashed violently into the hearts of all the hearers. Elder, run, hurry up and leave. After being momentarily stunned, an uproar broke out. All the hearers' hearts were filled with endless terror at that moment, and they instantly broke down. All of them started retreating, and all the thoughts in their heads were directed towards escaping. All members of the 9th tribe, hear me, follow me, and kill our way over. This time, we will make them pay several-fold for the slaughter the hearers have inflicted on us over the years. Dijo Mo Sha let out a roar, and a monstrous hatred appeared in his eyes. As he roared, the shadow of the black-furred giant appeared behind him, along with Tian Xiezi's body, which Su Ming fixed his gaze on once again. Roars immediately responded to him. It was the eruption of all the warriors of the 9th tribe that had been suppressed for countless years. At that moment, hundreds of people flew out and turned into long arcs that charged into the sky to fight against the hearers who were fleeing like scattered sand. One side fled desperately, and the other chased after them madly while roaring. Clearly, this battle would not end within a short period of time, and the battle line would be lengthened. Su Ming stood at the top of the mountain and watched this scene. He sighed. The hearers had no enmity with him. With Su Ming's principles, as long as they did not provoke him, then he would not destroy their entire tribe for no reason. One such example was the hearers. This was the first time Su Ming ran into this tribe. However, his gaze fell on his master, who was standing on the head of the black-furred giant behind Dijo Mo Sha, who was chasing after the hearers from the distance. With that one glance, a resolve appeared in his eyes. His principles could change because of his master. This is the tribe master cultivated in the barren lands of divine essence. It is his companion for many years of loneliness. Su Ming lifted his right hand, formed a seal, and swung his arm into the distance. With it, the totem formed by the Duke of Crimson Flame on his arm turned into a cloud of fire that instantly appeared in the distance. That was the border where the fleeing hearers had yet to get close to. The Duke of Crimson Flame walked out of the cloud of fire. With an aloof expression, he spread his arms wide open and roared at the sky. With just one roar, a sea of fire swiftly spread out with him as its center. In the span of a breath, a wall of fire was erected on the ground. That wall was like a seal that completely destroyed the hearer's final hope of survival. No, we're willing to submit. We're willing to join the 9th tribe. Spare us. This is all the elders' orders. We had no choice but to come. Pleading, crazed, or despairing voices instantly reverberated in all directions, but all of them turned into screams of pain that were drowned out by the enraged roars of vengeance from the 9th tribe. Su Ming closed his eyes and sat down cross-legged at the top of the mountain. He did not want to participate in this slaughter. Helping the tribe kill the strongest old man and getting rid of the sea of insects that was spreading through the ground was something he did for his master, but that was all he could do. To Su Ming, who was used to seeing death, whether this tribe could continue existing and whether they could reproduce through the passage of time was not important. Shrill screams of pain rose and fell in his ears. The stench of blood was thick and did not disappear. Once it crashed into the sea of fire, it turned into a foul stench. As time passed, the screams of pain gradually grew fewer, but at that moment, Su Ming suddenly opened his eyes and looked into the distance. He saw a hearer whose path had been blocked by the sea of fire, and he was fighting against Dijo Mo Sha with his life on the line. His level of cultivation was extraordinary and seemed to be equivalent to those in the later stage of World Plane Realm. He was on equal footing with Dijo Mo Sha. Booming sounds reverberated in the air from their divine abilities, and their fight had reached its most intense moment. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever, but he let out a cold harumph. Dijo Mo Sha could not see it, and neither could anyone from the 9th tribe. However, In Su Ming's eyes, he could clearly see a fine crack in the air behind the hearer. It was swiftly being torn apart, and in a few breaths, it would be torn apart, and all the people would see it. Su Ming's cold harumph did not travel too far. It only reverberated in the area of 100-something feet around him. However, the fine crack behind the hearer in the distance that no one else could see stopped at the instant Su Ming let out a cold harumph. At the same time, the divine essence runic symbols in Su Ming's eyes shone. The world before him seemed to have instantly become still and still under his power of divine essence, turning into a frozen picture. Su Ming was momentarily stunned. When he looked over, the picture was instantly magnified in his eyes, as if it was moving. As it grew larger endlessly, it looked as if the distance between Su Ming and the hearer had been shortened, and right before Su Ming's eyes, his gaze shot through the man's body and landed on the space behind him, which seemed normal, but had fine cracks on it, which seemed to be the same. As Su Ming stared at it, that space was magnified endlessly once again. When it was magnified several hundreds of times, Su Ming saw a fine crack. It was magnified again, and when it was magnified several thousands of times, the crack turned into a gigantic ravine in Su Ming's eyes. His gaze shot through it, and he saw a powerful ray of light. That powerful ray of light moved through Su Ming's eyes until he saw a black piece of land within it. There was a black volcano on that land, and it was erupting. At the foot of the mountain was a tribe formed by black towers. There were men, women, the elderly, and the young in that tribe, but at that moment, all of them were kneeling on the ground and surrounding a statue. That statue was an eyeball. An incredibly frail old man whose body was covered in festering wounds was panting harshly. Hatred and anxiety appeared in his eyes, and they surrounded the eyeball as if they were dancing. Complicated chants tumbled out of his mouth, causing the eyeball to gradually turn murky, as if 10,000 years had passed by in an instant. Based on the appearance of the kneeling tribe members, it could be seen that they were hearers, and this was clearly where their tribe was located. As for the eyeball, it was definitely the god that the hearers had worshipped over the countless years. At that moment, it was clear that they had sensed the deaths of their tribe members and were worshipping their god, hoping that their god would bring forth a miracle. Almost at the instant Su Ming's gaze pierced through space and looked over, a vertical pupil immediately appeared on the eyeball that was being worshipped. That pupil was brown, and it looked as if there were countless vengeful souls struggling within it, wanting to rush out. It gave all those who saw it an incredibly sinister feeling. That pupil turned, and in an instant, it met Su Ming's gaze. At the instant their gazes met, the eyeball's pupil shrank, and a piercing roar reverberated in Su Ming's heart. With a bang, the world before Su Ming's eyes tumbled backwards from its previously magnified state until it returned to nothingness and the ravine. The ravine turned into a crack, and when the world he saw was no longer a picture, it returned to normal. The sound of flames burning reverberated in the air, and the stench of blood spread out. The fight between the hearer and Digio Mo Sha continued. Su Ming moved backwards, as if he had been struck by an invisible force. A freezing glare immediately shone in his eyes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1039. Divine Essence Treasure. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes, and he stood up swiftly. He knew clearly that none of his divine abilities could make the world turn into a still scene to a certain extent, and he could even magnify the scene with his gaze. Once he magnified it countless times, he would be able to see the fine details that he usually could not notice. Even if he had divine essence gathered in his eyes, he would still not be able to do this. In truth, even Su Ming himself had been stunned by the scene he had seen just now. When he connected the dots, he realized that this was not his art, but the divine essence in his eyes. It had formed some sort of connection with the eyeball that Su Ming did not understand. It was precisely this connection that allowed Su Ming to execute a divine ability that was incredibly powerful, even when he thought back to it. Su Ming's eyes sparkled. At the instant he got up, he took a swift step forward, and he was so quick that he instantly appeared beside Djo Shah and right in front of the hearer. Almost at the instant he arrived, a roar that reverberated in Su Ming's heart came from the space behind the hearer, causing Su Ming's footsteps to falter for a moment. However, as the divine essence runic symbols in his eyes shone, he instantly recovered. The brilliant light in his eyes grew stronger, and he did not even spare the man a glance. With a step, he walked past him and seized the air in the direction of the space with his right hand. With it, booming sounds surged into the sky. Countless ripples instantly appeared in space. No one could see them, but Su Ming could vaguely sense that the crack was swiftly closing up. Soon after, an even stronger roar echoed in Su Ming's heart, fighting against the power of his divine essence. We connected it to the roar that had echoed in his heart when he arrived. It was clear that the voice was trying to stop him. Su Ming then looked at the rapidly closing up crack. It was clear that the eyeball that the hearers worshipped had noticed that there was something on Su Ming that terrified it. It could sense the threat Su Ming would bring to it, which was why it did not hesitate to reject the hearers who had worshipped it for years and did not save their people, but instead closed the crack to stop Su Ming from approaching. Roars shook the sky in the hearers' tribe. All the people surrounding the eyeball pressed their hands against their ears. As they screamed in pain, blood flowed out of their eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Some of them even died on the spot. The old man's expression changed drastically. He did not know what had happened, but he could sense the fear in his eyes. It was as if the eyeball had sensed an existence that made it uneasy and was now rapidly closing the passageway that had been opened. When Su Ming looked at the eyeball again, he found that its pupils had shrank. The countless shadows of vengeful souls in it were letting out piercing screams that caused the hearers to die and suffer in pain. Su Ming's heart trembled, and his body froze because of it. The sounds that required him to use divine essence to fight against them were coming from them. Who is it? Who is it that can actually make the evil eye afraid? The frail old man's body trembled. He lifted his right hand and pressed it against the eyeball. He wanted to feel it, to see who it was that had annihilated the warriors of his tribe. He wanted to make the wretch eye so terrified that it would disregard the life and death of its own tribe and go back on its promise to annihilate them. As Su Ming fought against the screams with his divine essence, he seized space with his right hand and yanked it outwards. The power of his cultivation base erupted from his body, and with a bang, space was immediately torn apart by Su Ming. At the same time, a violent wave of power erupted from the tear and charged towards Su Ming. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, Su Ming instantly moved back. He grabbed Djo Shah and retreated several hundreds of feet with him. Then, he lifted his head and looked at the crack in space he had torn apart. Other people might not have noticed anything about the crack, but when Su Ming looked at it, he had a feeling that the crack was incredibly similar to the pupil of the eyeball. Su Ming's appearance and his act of grabbing Djo Shah and retreating stunned Djo Shah, but he immediately retreated. He might not know why Su Ming had suddenly come, but the sense of danger that came from the crack that had appeared behind the hearer that made his heart tremble made him suddenly understand why Su Ming had come. As for the hearer, he looked towards Su Ming with a furious roar, but he did not move forward. Instead, he retreated swiftly, and he was about to crash into the crack behind him. Su Ming stood there and did not stop him. When he saw the man's body crash into the crack and the desire to survive appear on his face, Su Ming smiled coldly. As he did so, the man let out a shrill scream of pain. At the instant his body crashed into the crack, he was not relocated. Instead, as if his life and all his cultivation base had been sucked away, his body instantly withered away, and in the blink of an eye, he was reduced to nothing but skin and bones. Once the man's life force was absorbed, the crack was like a wound on a person's body. Once it was replenished, it started healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. As it healed, it swiftly retreated, and in the blink of an eye, only a fine line was left. So, you're afraid of me. Su Ming moved forward and charged towards the rapidly healing crack. Do not offend each other. A buzzing sound, mixed with a roar that was filled with an ancient air, came swiftly from the rapidly healing crack. That voice reverberated in the world and stirred up an endless amount of echoes that lingered in the air. Do not offend each other. Huh? If my level of cultivation wasn't high enough, would you still say that? Su Ming asked flatly. He still closed in, lifted his right hand, and seized at the healing crack with his fingers once again. With a ripping sound, the crack was torn open once again. This time, Su Ming did not stop. He endured the roars that were ringing in his heart and withstood the violent force that came crashing down on him from the crack. Then, he charged towards the crack and instantly rushed inside. At the same time he stepped into the crack, the malicious eyes, roars, and hearers tribe reached their peak. The old man who had his right hand pressed against the malicious eye was the first to be affected, and his body instantly dissipated. All the hearers around him died shrilly. Once they fell to the ground, their bodies withered away, and they turned into ashes that scattered into the wind. Once all of their life force was absorbed by the evil eye, the eyeball flew up and shot out of the tribe formed by the Black Towers, which was now deathly still, to escape into the sky. At that moment, a loud bang immediately came from the spot where the hearers had died in the hearers' tribe formed by the Black Towers. A gigantic crack tore through the air, and Su Ming walked out. At the instant he did so, he lifted his head and saw the fleeing malicious eye in the sky. "Become my eye," Su Ming said calmly. He did not chase after it, but lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the sky. Immediately, the sky rumbled, and a huge hand appeared in the sky. That hand was several tens of thousands of feet in size, and it was swiftly seizing the malicious eye. "No!" An enraged roar came from within the malicious eye. As it reverberated in the air, it turned into a large amount of ripples that crashed into the incoming hand in the sky. As booming sounds surged into the sky, the hand immediately disintegrated. The malicious eye shot through it and left into the distance once again. It was fated that we would meet today. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he still did not move. However, the Duke of Crimson Flame walked out of the air with a sea of fire right before the malicious eye. When he lifted his right hand, the sea of fire turned into another gigantic palm that went to seize the malicious eye. Damn it! No way! The malicious eye was murky and filled with smoke. There were countless malicious spirits howling ferociously within it. Some of them even rushed out of the eyeball and turned into an endless amount of phantoms. There were quite a large number of hearers among them, and they charged towards the Duke of Crimson Flame's palm of fire. At the instant they crashed into each other, booming sounds reverberated in the air. The palm of fire crumbled and turned into an endless sea of fire that burned and fell down. However, the malicious eye seemed to be able to sense a crack that did not contain any flames. With a few flashes, it shot through the sea of fire and was about to fly out of Su Ming's sight. However, Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. "This is your life." Su Ming calmly stated the last half of his sentence. At the instant he said those words, a gigantic shadow immediately appeared before the charging malicious eye in the distance. That shadow was of a tree, and it was Su Ming's Akang's projection. When Akang's projection appeared, a presence that could destroy the entire world appeared with a bang and turned into a suppressive force, causing the malicious eye to let out a cry of despair. "Akang! Damn you, Akang! You were the one who killed my real body in the past and offered it to old man extermination in exchange for your eternal life. You ambushed me when I was at my weakest. If it wasn't because of that, how could you possibly be my opponent? I am the first I that was born before the world. I am the first I that saw the rise and fall of the universe with my own eyes. I can't accept this." The roar coming from the malicious eye was filled with an indescribable madness and hatred. It rushed out and charged towards Akang's projection. When it rushed out, it rapidly swelled up, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a gigantic eye that was 100,000 feet big. It stood erect in the world, and with a bang, it crashed into a Kang's projection. Yet at the instant they crashed into each other, a hand stretched out from a Kang's projection. Compared to the gigantic eye, that hand was incredibly insignificant. At the instant it touched the malicious eye, shrill screams of pain reverberated in all directions. Booming sounds surged into the sky. Su Ming stood on the ground and did not move. When the booming sounds faded away and a Kang's projection disappeared, a handsome, long-haired man dressed in purple stood in the sky with a presence that made him seem as if he was looking down on the entire world. In his hand was an eyeball. The eyeball was gray at that moment, but gray smoke and clouds surged within it, as if it contained the rise and fall of the universe. The purple-haired man was naturally Su Ming's a Kang clone. This was the first time Su Ming had used a Kang's projection as a tunnel and his soul as a guide to summon his Kang clone over in divine essence Star Ocean. You are mine. This is your life, Su Ming and his Kang clone said at the same time. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1040. There was no true fairness in this world. It was just like what Su Ming had said when he was in the Yu family in the past. He had long since seen through this so-called fairness. Since there was no fairness, then the law of the jungle was an eternal law that would never change in the world. It was just like how the malicious eye had been ambushed by a Kang in the past. When it was at its weakest, it had used its physical body in exchange for eternal life from old man extermination, which could be written into the ballot. It was just like now. One of the eyes of the powerful creature that had escaped by a stroke of luck had returned to a Kang's hand once again. However, this time, the one who led all of this was not a Kang's will, but Su Ming's soul. The Kang clone held the malicious eye and slowly placed it at the center of his brows. At the instant the eyeball touched his forehead, the world roared. Countless bolts of lightning appeared out of nowhere and spread out in all directions with the Kang clone as the center. It caused the sky to look as if it had been turned into a huge net by lightning. When the Kang clone slowly lowered his right hand in the net, an eye appeared at the center of his brows. It was a malicious eye that shone with a screen of purple light. It was a malicious eye that exuded a strange and enchanting presence. The pupil of the eye was vertical, and there were countless vengeful souls struggling and howling at the edges of the pupil. Some of them even spread outwards. Because of it, no one would think that Su Ming's Kang clone was a good person if they saw him. This appearance and that strange and enchanting air were enough to bring a great shock to all those who saw him. That shock would turn into a will that was not to be easily provoked. Those who saw Su Ming's Kang clone would also feel that he was filled with malevolent aura. The density of that malevolent aura had almost reached its limit. If it truly reached its limit, then the word malevolent would no longer be able to describe it. Perhaps a new term would be created by all the people who were shocked by Su Ming. The malicious eye moved at the center of the Kang clone's brows. Its pupil swiftly looked towards the huge net of lightning in the sky. With it, the bolts of lightning that filled the sky looked as if they were trembling. They distorted and disappeared in an instant. It was as if the Kang clone who had the malicious eye in the sky was a proud son that not even the net in the universe could envelop. At the same time the lightning in the sky disappeared, the Kang clone lowered his head. Once he met Su Ming's gaze on the ground, his body gradually disappeared until he disappeared without a trace. He returned to Western Ring Nebula's foreign land, to the 100,000 purple galaxies that belonged to his Kang clone. Once the Kang clone left, Su Ming closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, a thin purple line appeared at the center of his brows. That line was incredibly clear, and its appearance caused the malicious air around Su Ming to become as thick as the one around his Kang clone. He stood quietly on the ground and did not move. Time trickled by. When the third day arrived, Su Ming opened his eyes and lifted his head to look at the sky. A strange feeling rose in his heart. The sky was still the same as it was 3 days ago. When Su Ming looked at it, nothing had changed. The world in his eyes was also the same as before. The sky was gray, and beyond the edge of it was an endless galaxy. This strange sight could only be seen with his own eyes in divine essence star ocean. The land was dry and without any signs of life. When Su Ming swept his gaze across it, there was a stillness in the flat land. However, Su Ming could sense that he seemed to be able to see more. He could see things that other people could not see. "Malicious eye," Su Ming said calmly. At the instant he said those words, the thin purple line at the center of his brows opened up. This was not a thin line. It was the projection of the malicious eye on Su Ming's cultivation-based clone and his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole. When it opened its eyes, the vertical pupils and the countless struggling shadows of vengeful souls immediately appeared at the center of Su Ming's brows. Roars that could intimidate hearts echoed in the air around Su Ming. However, this time, the roars could not affect him, but if there were other cultivators beside him at that moment, then their bodies and bodies would definitely be affected by the piercing impact to their hearts. The roars surged into the sky, and Su Ming lifted his head again. When he looked at the sky, he saw a completely different scene. He saw 900-something different skies. This was a scene that was difficult to describe with words. It was as if 900-something people had lifted their heads to look at the sky at the same time, and the scenes that appeared before their eyes were all gathered in one person's eyes. Because of it, it could be said that he saw 900-something similar skies, but they were all different. This was what Su Ming saw when he looked at it with a malicious eye. Soon after, the 900-something skies instantly overlapped with each other, and the sky in his eyes changed. In Su Ming's eyes, it was magnified by 1-fold. Su Ming did not stop. Once he magnified it by 1-fold, he enlarged it again. The picture swiftly spread out like flowing water in his eyes, and only when it was magnified by 9 times did it stop. At that moment, Su Ming saw an endless amount of fine particles in the gray sky. These particles were gray in color, and it was them that formed the gray sky in this place. Perhaps more accurately speaking, this was not the sky, but a layer of gray fog. Su Ming lowered his head and looked at the ground. He saw that there were in truth countless fine cracks on the seemingly flat ground, and a large number of them were continuously spreading out. However, the people around him would not be able to notice them. This was Su Ming's malicious eye at that moment. Before it opened, it was a thin purple thread, but when it opened, it turned into the first eye that saw the rise and fall of the universe. Su Ming sucked in a deep breath. The malicious eye at the center of his brows closed and turned back into the thin purple thread. Great confidence rose in Su Ming's heart. This confidence did not come from his level of cultivation, but was a form of control. With these eyes, Su Ming had gained the right to say that he could control the Eye of Death. He could control the battlefield, control all battles of arts, and control life and death. There are 900-something souls in this eye, which is why it can magnify 9 times. If that's the case, then the more vengeful souls this eye absorbs, the more shocking the magnification will be. Su Ming swung his arm, and with a single move, he turned into a long arc that instantly disappeared from the ground. Several days later, the 9th tribe was located on the continent floating in the galaxy. Stone houses surrounded the mountain, and there were nearly 1,000 members of the 9th tribe. They were preparing food in the morning amidst the smoke rising from the chimneys. There were a few children playing in the house. Their youthful laughter echoed in the morning, causing their elders to occasionally look over and smile, which was something that was rarely seen on their faces. The women in the tribe had put down their weapons and were taking care of the elderly and children, as well as preparing food. The warriors in the tribe were sitting at the foot of the mountain and meditating in an orderly fashion to train. There were also some members of the tribe who had gone out to hunt and had yet to return. The entire tribe was filled with a peace that they had not felt for a long time after a great battle. Only the line formed by the pit thousands of feet away from the foot of the mountain showed the devastation of the battle. At that moment, it remained on the ground and turned into a barrier. It was on this morning that Su Hui opened her eyes and woke up. When she woke up, she looked at her surroundings in a daze. The last thing she remembered was seeing a familiar figure. When this image appeared in her mind, she saw a figure sitting on a mountain rock outside her house while facing the sun. She could only see his back, but that back overlapped with a last image in her memory. "You're awake. The porridge soup of the ninth tribe is pretty good. You can have some." The familiar voice came from a place where the familiar figure in Su Hui's eyes came from. Su Hui lowered her head and saw that the porridge soup was still steaming. Her face was still slightly pale. She shifted her gaze away from the porridge soup and looked at her own body. When she did so, her eyes narrowed. She saw that her clothes had been replaced with coarse linen clothes, and they were empty underneath. Her wounds were healing, and the cultivation base in her body was gradually circulating. The injuries she had sustained were too severe, so severe that they could have taken her life. Even though she was currently recovering, she would not be able to use her cultivation base for a short period of time. A feeling of weakness rose in Su Hui's heart. She was unfamiliar with this feeling. It was as if she had become a mortal, and it caused her to fall silent. She picked up the steaming porridge soup and took a small sip. Once she licked the corners of her lips, she immediately started drinking in big mouthfuls. Soon, she finished the entire bowl. Her complexion had recovered slightly, but she was still sickly pale. However, she felt much better. She stood up slowly, and her breathing quickened slightly along with her simple actions. She held onto the mountain rock beside her and walked out of the stone house. She stood under the sunlight and looked at the sky, the land under the mountain, and breathed in the morning air. Su Hui lowered her head and looked at Su Ming. After a moment of silence, she said in a low voice, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Su Ming said faintly while sitting on the mountain rock and looking at the sky in the distance. "You changed my clothes?" Su Hui suddenly asked. "Yes." Su Ming nodded. Su Hui fell silent once again. She did not continue standing, but instead sat down and also looked into the distance. Mountain breeze blew past and lifted some of her hair. She lifted her hand to catch it, but when the wind blew, it did not lift a few strands of her hair, but most of it. She could not catch all of it with her hand, just like how her heart, which was filled with thoughts, could not regain its previous calmness. "You have a good figure," Su Ming said faintly, his expression as calm as ever. However, when his words fell into Su Hui's ears, she immediately looked towards him, but soon she suddenly smiled elegantly. "Thank you." Su Ming turned his head sideways and looked at Su Hui. He looked at the elegant smile on her face, and for the first time, he found the woman before him to be very interesting. "It's just that I have more moles," Su Ming said calmly. "I can't help it. My parents gave them to me, and I don't want to erase them." "It's been hard on you," Su Hui said lightly. She lowered her right hand and no longer tugged at the hair that was blown away by the wind. "Monday, please recommend me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 1041. Dusk. In Divine Essence Star Ocean, Su Ming saw the sun rise, set, and dusk on the continent. This cannot be explained. He was clearly in a dark galaxy, and the continent was floating in it. So where did the sunlight come from? And where did day and night come from? But the sun was indeed there. Strangely, when a person stepped into the galaxy, they would not be able to see it, but if they were in a cultivation planet or the continent ninth tribe chose, they would be able to see it. Su Ming had asked Djo Mo Sha about this before. That's the light and heat spreading out from the fifth kiln. Before the fifth kiln, the world in Divine Essence Star Ocean was dark. The darkness here has existed for an endless amount of time, and people are already used to it. Once the fifth kiln arrived, it caused light to appear in Divine Essence Star Ocean. However, you can see it, but you can't find it, unless it appears before everyone on its own once in a while. Some people say that the fifth kiln's true location is in the world in the vortex, Djo Mo Sha answered. Su Ming sat on the mountain rock and watched the sun formed by the fifth kiln gradually set in the distance. At that moment, when he looked over, he could see that the sun was indeed not round, but had the outline of a kiln. That was indeed the fifth kiln. The afterglow of dusk shone on the ground, bringing with it the warmth of the day. It fused with the cold wind blowing towards them and landed on a person's body. No one could say whether it was warm or cold. Su Ming had been sitting there for 2 days. Ever since he came to the barren lands of divine essence, his heart had calmed down, which was a rare sight. He could watch the sunrise and sunset. Perhaps cultivators would not be used to the lifestyle in the tribe, but to Su Ming, this place was filled with the familiarity of his memories. People would always like to recall the past when they were familiar with something, immerse themselves in it, and turn their heads back to look at their lives. The children playing by his ears made him remember Dark Mountain Tribe. The friendship between the members of Ninth Tribe made Su Ming remember Ninth Summit. As he looked at everything around him, Su Ming told himself more than once that this was the tribe where his master had once lived for many years. Perhaps the people here still had his master's figure in their memories. If eldest senior brother, second senior brother, Huzi, and the others learned about master and came here as well, how good would that be? Su Ming shook his head. As the sun set, night fell. The area gradually grew quiet. The children's play turned into rhythmic breathing. The elderly fell asleep. The members of the Ninth Tribe either meditated or fell in a deep sleep. It caused the mountain to be completely silent in the middle of the night. Su Ming continued sitting on a mountain rock and looked at the dark sky. He could not see the moon, neither could he see the stars. The only thing he could see was endless darkness. It was as if he was the only one left in the world at that moment. He was already used to this sort of feeling, since he was used to the sadness of being alone in this life. Why should he still be unable to extricate himself from his memories? He always liked to look at the dark sky and the fireworks that blossomed in his heart. Since he was used to living alone, then even if he had a past life, he would have reincarnated for thousands of years. Su Ming smiled in the darkness. No one would be able to see the anguish in his smile. Only those who had truly smiled like this before would be able to see the bitterness in his smile, as if it had fused with the water. Only those who had tasted the water before would know the bitterness in it. What's wrong with you? A gentle voice did not break Su Ming's thoughts, which had sunk into the darkness. Instead, it fused into his mind gently and surrounded his ears before turning into a petite figure dressed in sackcloth. She slowly walked out of the house and sat down gently beside him. "I miss home," Su Ming said softly. "If that's the case, then we can leave tomorrow." Su Hui stared at Su Ming in the darkness. She could only see his silhouette, but she liked being stared at like this because she knew that only at that moment could she see the true person and not Dao Kong. She understood, but she did not want to say it. "Do you believe in fate?" Su Ming shook his head. "I do." This was Su Hui's answer after a moment of silence. When a few pictures flashed in her eyes, she answered softly. "There aren't many cultivators who believe in fate." Su Ming looked at Su Hui through the darkness. "I believe in fate, or else I wouldn't have appeared here," Su Hui said softly. "Once you're healed, you can go to the 9 old frail darknesses. As for me, it's not time for me to go home yet." There was an ancient tone to Su Ming's voice in the darkness. "Are you staying here to wait for me to recover?" Su Hui looked at Su Ming. "Sleep. I want to meditate here alone," Su Ming said calmly. Su Ming did not answer. Instead, he spoke calmly. There was no longer any ancient air in his voice, and neither was there any nostalgia. Su Hui did not stay. She stood up and walked into the house, leaving Su Ming alone in the darkness. "Perhaps you're missing home, but more than that, you are missing a person." Su Hui's voice came from the house. Her voice drifted through the air and landed in Su Ming's ears. Su Ming fell silent. He closed his eyes and immersed himself in the darkness. He meditated quietly and circulated his cultivation base. In the cold wind, he felt as if he had returned to the 9th summit, as if he had returned to the cave abode that belonged to him. He meditated and watched the sun rise and set. Cultivators did not dream. because dreams came from sleep. To cultivators, deep sleep could be replaced by meditation. But on that night, as Su Ming meditated, he had a dream. In his dream, he returned to the land of berserkers. In his dream, he saw the ninth summit. In his dream, he also saw Dark Mountain. He saw the people in the forest in his tribe when he was young. There was Xiao Hong, and also the girl who stood alone under a big tree in the snow. She was dressed in a white mink fur long robe and had a wild beauty about her. She waited alone on the snow. She waited for a promise that she would walk in circles with a boy. There were layers upon layers of mountains in the distance. The cold moon in the sky was hazy and sparse. Snow and pine trees were the only companions on the ground. The girl who was waiting for him was still standing on the spot, watching over him in a daze. Wind, snow, dust, and the changing of the growth rings. Would she have no regrets? However, the clouds were separated by several galaxies and several layers of the universe. There were no longer any letters that could be sent to her. 1,000 years passed, and water fell without a trace. The cedar trees looked the same every year. He did not know whether the beauty had faded away, and whether still water could also disappear without a trace. You gave me a wish for tomorrow, and I've already waited for you for 1,000 years. But don't make me wait for too long. Don't let my silence turn into darkness. Su Ming opened his eyes. The mumbles from his dreams were still echoing in his ears. He suddenly understood. Perhaps he was truly not thinking about his home, and neither was he thinking about a person. Instead, he was thinking about a promise from 1,000 years ago. Is this my obsession? Or is someone purposely causing me to have this obsession? Su Ming looked at the sky in the distance, gradually turning from darkness to light. He watched the night flow away like flowing water, and he asked himself a question in his heart. Or else, why would I keep thinking about that promise? Or else, why wouldn't I be thinking about Bai Ling? Or else, why would I dream while meditating? The dazed look in Su Ming's eyes swiftly turned sharp, and there was a piercing chill in them. It was as if he was an ancient, ferocious beast that had just woken up from its slumber, revealing the inviolability of its blood. A domineering presence spread out from Su Ming's body. He welcomed the first ray of sunlight in the sky and stood up. He stood under the mountain rock, and his body was enveloped by sunlight at that moment. When he turned around, he looked towards the sky where the sunlight was shining and focused his gaze. The purple thread at the center of his brows opened up and turned into the malicious eye. The clouds and fog within it turned into the phantom shadow, and with a ferocious expression, all of them looked towards the direction where Su Ming was looking. At the same time, another Su Ming appeared in the sky without anyone noticing. It was the shadow of his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole. The malicious eye appeared at the center of the clone's brows, and it looked in the same direction. Soon after, the Ikane clone who was meditating in the purple galaxy in Western Ring Nebula's foreign land had the small candle dragon snake coiled around his arm. The Ikane clone's eyes flew open, and the real malicious eye at the center of his brows opened as well. When the malicious eye opened, the Ikane clone turned his head around and looked in the direction Su Ming was looking at with a focused gaze. This was Su Ming activating the power of the malicious eye at the same time with all three of his great cultivation bases. All his power erupted at the same time to look towards the endless space. Their gazes pierced through space as if they were moving through time. They moved past the area where the four great true worlds were stationed, the entrance to the barren lands of divine abyss, and looked towards true morning Tao world. They saw a war erupting in the place that belonged to the immortals in the gigantic true morning Tao world. It was a war between the immortals and Morning Tao sect. An innumerable number of cultivators were casting their endless divine abilities in the galaxy. Su Ming saw a physical body lying at the center of a rune formed by a large amount of shattered continents at the back of the boundless battlefield. He saw a person completely shrouded in black robes standing beside the physical body. That person had his slightly shriveled right hand lifted and was pressing it against the top of the physical body skull. There was another person by his side. That person was also dressed in black robes, but based on her figure, it was a woman. She was mumbling softly, and her voice echoed in the area. But don't make me wait for too long. Don't let silence turn into darkness. The woman's voice was gentle, and there was a hint of nostalgia as well as a hint of grief in it. At the instant she finished speaking, the tall, black-robed figure with his right hand pressed against the top of the physical body's skull lifted his head swiftly and looked toward space. With a bang, a wave of impact reverberated in the area out of nowhere. That impact brought with it wind, but did not lift the tall figure's black robes. However, it lifted the woman's hood to reveal a face before Su Ming's eyes. It was Bai Ling's face. The expression on her face was completely different from the grief in her previous words. It was an aloof expression, a calmness that contained not a hint of emotion. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.